Good morning to all the board members and those assisting or attending online. Thank you very much for being back to the third day of the board meeting. I hope that you all had the opportunity to get some rest, apart from the task force meetings that were held yesterday. We have a slightly lighter day ahead of us today because we will have time for readings this afternoon and for meetings. And this morning, what we aim at is to discuss the proposal for a strategy and work plan consultation paper, aiming at having it approved by and released by March on the basis of the discussions that we will hold today. Also, we will have an executive session by the end of this morning, and in between, we are aiming at approving, having a voting on the technology project, on which the task force has kindly managed to include the changes and the adjustments that were necessary following up on yesterday's discussion. Thank you very much to the task force for the effort to make these documents ready so that we can anticipate the voting for today. So this is the plan for today. We should be ready by lunchtime and give you the afternoon for the readings that will be necessary for tomorrow in the necessary meetings. We will start now with the discussion of the strategy and work plan. Just a very brief framework of background of this document. As you will remember, it was written and prepared on the basis of the survey and the responses to the survey that was launched a few months ago. This means a lot of work, and it's, I think, a very good paper, a very good document, because it's synthetic as much as possible, but it includes a considerable amount of work and information coming from the responses to the survey. So a very good work, in my opinion, was done in analyzing these responses, these answers from our stakeholders, and also in building on these responses after that analysis, namely with very good discussions with the board last September, and with the planning committee that has been analyzing and working on this document. So without any other comments on my side, what we aim at is to go through this document and get as many comments and suggestions from the board members as necessary, as it is the most strategic piece of this board meeting, I would say, because it will define the direction to take by this board on the next few years. Ken, any additional notes, or can I give the floor to you and Ken and Geoff?
Yeah, nothing further to add from my side at this point. Thank you, Gabriela.
So thank you very much, Ken. And I also want to thank Geoff and Ken for the great work done here in this document. And I'll give the floor to Geoff to present.
Thank you, Gabriela, and thank you, Ken, and good morning, everyone. So this morning we are going to walk through agenda item 6B, which is the draft consultation paper for the SWP. Of course, we have already started our SWP discussion yesterday. You would recall the discussions on the TWG's recommendations, and certainly have got some really good, I guess, comments from Rich and Brian and from the rest of the board as well. And so the PC will take those into consideration as it develops the next version of the consultation paper for the March board meeting. So this morning, we just want to walk through and get your feedback on three main components of the draft consultation paper. The first one is the proposed strategy for 24 to 27. Within that strategy, it has a few key components. As you've read the agenda item 6B, you will be able to see that there's a draft vision, then the strategic drivers, also and then it follows on with the strategic themes and actions. So we want to, I'll walk through those with you and then get your feedback accordingly. The second part we want to walk through with you would be the proposed work plan for the next strategy period, and it's divided into a few sections. Again, those who are ongoing projects when we commence the next strategy period in 24, the pre-committed work streams that would commence from 2024, and any proposed new projects that we would like to go out for consultation paper. And then towards the end, it's not as essential, but if the board has any immediate reactions to the list of proposed questions as well, we would love to take those, but of course you can send those comments to me direct as well. And of course, we will take into account the discussion we already had yesterday on the TWG recommendations. So before we go into those three components, just want to give you a bit of a report back of some of the key outreaches that we did since the last September meeting. There are three main meetings that we have attended with respect to the SWP. First one is the September CAC meeting. Second one is the IFAC PAIB advisory group meeting. And the third one is a joint IESBA and IESBA PC meeting. In terms of the CAG meeting, that happened the week after our September board meeting. And the CAG had a pretty good discussion, and I would say that they were generally quite supportive of the 4 strategic areas of focus that was in the strategy survey, namely sustainability, the focus on the role of PAIBs and independence, as well as adoption and implementation. The CAG actually spent most of its time talking about PAIBs, the role of PAIBs, particularly recognizing, the challenge, perhaps in terms of monitoring compliance of the code by PAIBs because they don't have the same level of regulatory supervision as auditors have. So we spent quite a bit of time discussing that. And I think the discussion came about because there is a recognition that they do play a really significant role in terms of the preparation of financial and, of course, non-financial information as well. So there is a real a desire to want to find out, how we can make sure there is, the compliance can be monitored. So I would say that discussion is quite positive, and it aligns with some of the comments we have heard from the respondents to the survey, as well as at the World Congress, Sanjeev and Gabriella and myself, we have heard from some of the PAOs highlighting similar issues in terms of compliance by PAIB and in terms of monitoring their compliance. But they're generally supportive of the strategic areas of focus, as I've said, and the direction that the board was traveling from the September meeting. So there's no real, key challenges or issues in that sense that they've raised in terms of the board's direction. But before I move forward, perhaps if I can just ask Galen, I know just to kind of spring that on you, but do you have any other additional comments about that particular session, Galen?
Jeff, I think you've covered it. I do believe that there's a little bit of reservations about the PAIB in terms of the grasp that that the code has on PAIBs. They don't have the regulatory oversight that the PAs in public practice have, and so I guess there was a little bit of reservation about that, and I think you hit on that as well, Jeff.
Okay. Thanks, Galen. And the next outreach we did was with the IFAC's PAIB advisory group meeting in September. There were two topics that we discussed with that group. First, we spent most of our time giving them a bit more of an update of what we are doing on with our sustainability work stream, and certainly there's broad support there. With the remaining time that we had, we did talk a little bit more about the I guess ongoing or any new ethical challenges that the PAIBs are experiencing. I would say that the comments that we received really focus very much on the CFOs and the new challenges that they're encountering. Particularly, I think certainly technology disruption was brought up, so that there is a sense, technology is continuing to impacting the role of CFOs, and of course, in terms there's a recognition that their role has expanded, and also the impact in terms of the market demand for sustainability information. So again, that's very much aligned with what we have heard from our respondents to the strategy survey, but also all the outreaches we've been doing over the course of the last few months in terms of the focus, I suppose, on CFOs and those who are in more senior roles of the PIIBs in more senior roles. The next I guess meeting that we had that we kind of was relevant to the SWP development and the consultation development was a joint PC meeting from the IESBA and IESBA in October. The reason why we have this joint PC meeting is, as you appreciate that as part of our coordination between the two boards, it is important that we continue to have meetings between the two boards, but unfortunately for this year, we just did not have an opportunity or we're able to find a space for a plenary meeting between the two full boards. So we thought a really good alternative is for the two PC to meet together. So we did that in October. Essentially, we only have one agenda item, and which is the discussion of the two boards' respective SWPs. Just to recap, I guess remind the board, the IESBA is also developing their SWP, and the timeline in terms of when they finish and approve it will be the same as ours, which will be end of 2023. So they at this stage is probably looking at distributing the draft consultation paper in maybe end of January, whereas for us will be after the March meeting. So we spent a bit of time talking about in terms of developing the two SWPs, whether there are any sort of common strategic drivers or environmental factors that are really affecting the two boards' work and vision and strategic direction. We talked about whether there are any projects that require more coordination. And we also talked about in terms of within our respective SWPs, or at least at this stage, the consultation paper, how we can highlight and give a stronger message about the importance of coordination between the two boards. So I would say that we've had quite a, I think it's a really robust and positive discussion that we've had with the two PCs. There certainly is a strong recognition that of the importance of coordination. There is a strong, I think, an acknowledgement that certainly since we started coordinating with each other a few years ago, in a more formal way, we certainly have gone a long way, and many of the projects are coordinated, and we do think about the other boards as we develop the projects. But I think there is a recognition of the importance is not just coordinating at the technical level, which is at the project by project level, but we also need to coordinate on a strategic level, which is why we get together and talk about our SWPs. There is also an opportunity for the two boards to coordinate, and I guess perhaps in a more operational level, taking into account that we are moving into a new operational structure with a more staff-run model. So we are looking at coordination in all those three different on all those three different levels. I would say in terms of this particular draft consultation paper that in Agenda 6B, if you happen to look at the IESBA consultation paper, it does look and feel very similar. We have our strategic vision. They have their mission. We use slightly different terms, but essentially the structure is fairly similar. But more importantly, not so much as the structure, but you will notice that the messaging is quite similar. And also, for instance, we do share a few common strategic drivers. When you look at our strategic themes, they are quite similar to IESB's strategic objectives. And of course, they of course a very different work program to us. But the thinking is very similar in terms of how we address our strategy and work plan. So I think that many of our common users, when they read the two consultation paper, I think that there will be a lot more clarity in terms of they can see how the two boards are coordinating, then they can see how the two boards are working through some of the work program for the next strategy period. And we won't cover that later on, but you would note that in our draft consultation paper, there is a section on coordination with IESB. And we have purposely made it into, expanded it out a bit more, talking about the strategic coordination, technical and operational coordination. I think out of the joint PC discussion, I think there is a sense that it's really important that we highlight to our users, not only the achievement that we've made in terms of coordination in this current strategy period, but going forward, the importance of coordination is in our strategic direction and also in our work plan. The two PCs also talk about some of the common issues. And of course, we spent quite a bit of time talking about sustainability. And the 2PC recognizes this is a really a fantastic opportunity to really for the two boards to not only coordinate right from the outset, and which we have done, but to think more creatively how we can achieve the objectives of our respective projects. And so there's certainly a recognition that this is an important project for the two boards to make sure that we do achieve our objectives with high quality standards that will meet our public interest demand. The two boards also recognize that, we continue to deal with the issues of trust, certainly recognizing what has gone through in our respective, in our current strategy periods, some of the projects that are underway or have finished, and we continue to work on some of these issues in our strategy going forward. So it was quite a robust discussion. There are a lot of views, and there's a summary or report back in agenda item 6. If you want to have a closer look. But before I move to the strategy proper, perhaps I'll just see if Gabriella or Ken have any other additional comments about the joint PC meeting.
Thank you, Jeff. Not on my side, just stressing the importance of this coordination that has been raised over times, many times, given that we have made some decisions to make sure that we are, in terms of timings and cycles, more aligned with the IEESB, both boards are aligned. It is important that we keep this coordination in an ongoing basis. So that's it.
Thank you, Jeff and Gabriella. Maybe I'll share a bit of color, not so much in relation to the joint planning committee meeting we had last month, but more in relation to the IFAC PAIB meeting we had with them towards the end of September. It was a conversation. It was really the first time we were touching base with the PAIB group within IFAC, which effectively represents the PAIB community at large, on the topic of sustainability. And whilst Jeff has indicated sort of at the high level, generally broad support for the for IESBA to be very strategic about its role and its the importance of its standards in the area of sustainability. I think it's fair to say that there was a bit of a discussion, and what triggered the discussion was because we were presenting basically a bit of the direction of travel in terms of IESBA tackling this vision of profession agnostic standards, and that triggered a bit of unhappiness, I would say, amongst a few of the participants, and I think it's important for the board to be sensitized about this, and I'm sure you will be aware or have been aware that there are some a sense of unease within the profession. And in this context, it was the sort of the business side, the accountancy business side, but I would say also within some of the firms in public practice, when they hear IESBA venturing into the area of developing profession agnostic standards, and the sense I collected from at least the engagement of the PAIB group is that. You know, here's IESBA thinking about giving away the family silverware, you know, to put it in a sort of in a metaphorical way, and there was a bit of, as I say, a bit of unhappiness or a bit of unease, and it took a bit of explaining as to why this was important for IESBA to address the need to have standards that would apply to all, at least in this initial strategic phase, as we embark on the journey to develop sustainability-related standards, at least standards that would address the assurance side of sustainability. So some of the reactions we collected essentially touched on a concern that continues to permeate within some parts of the profession about the pace of change, and also the increasing burden of the standards on the profession. And the concern that we heard also was a concern that we heard as Gabriela and I undertook some outreach as we visited different stakeholders in, I think, in some parts of Europe in particular. And that is the concern that as standards of ethics become more rigorous, there is a concern, and I think some have even said, that there is anecdotal evidence that members of the profession are leaving the profession because of the burden of compliance with the standards. And the concern was that IESBA should think carefully about the standards it sets and the impact of the standards in the profession. So there's a bit of connectivity between what IESBA is doing in terms of standards of relating to sustainability and the broader concern in terms of the burden of compliance. But I thought it's important for this board to be sensitized about some of the, as I say, some of the sense of unease within the profession. I think, Gabriela, you will have gathered that sense as well as you've been going around and talking to stakeholders, especially within the profession, be it within the firms or the accountancy bodies.
Thank you very much, Ken, for sharing that. To respond to your last question about what I have been gathering, yes, sometimes, but my impression is that that feeling and that approach is slightly gradually changing, and that there is, together with that sense of unease or unhappiness that we are doing something also that can be applicable. We are not working for the non-professional accountants, but that can be applicable to the others. There is also the sense that there may be impacts from the IESBA standards on the profession because they become more rigorous or more extended to others, etc. But I think that there is also the sense, at least within the most sophisticated or that have already developed some thinking about it, that the lack of rigor and the lack of standards will have probably a huge impact in the profession in the long term. So this perception, this immediate perception that we are becoming more rigorous and addressing and covering areas and scopes where before the IESBA was not touching upon, is somehow, this is my perception, compensated by also by the perception that things are changing around, culture is changing, the scrutiny of stakeholders is getting much higher, and then so it is important that standard setting develops in terms that it may cover also those changes. So it's a difficult balance to achieve. And what I take from this conversation, and thank you, Ken, for sharing these perceptions from these meetings, which are quite important. What is necessary for this board, to my view, is to keep constantly aware of what's happening around, and not only following, but trying also to shape these understandings and these approaches, because I think it's more than understandable that those who are specifically targeted by these changes and these standards, etc., may feel, at least at the start, not at ease or a little bit unhappy or whatever. But we have also, we as a standard setter, we are the ones who have the distance to understand things in a colder way, in a more neutral way, and to help everybody, and for the public interest, of course, but to help everybody going in the right direction. So, and for that we have to be informed. I think that being informed is critical. And from this very extensive outreach that we have been undertaking, we see, and I think that you and Ken and me are in this very good position to say that every day we learn something new that we did not know before. And even our approach is gradually changing at the same as we know more than we did before. So it is important to get informed. It is important to get some distance between the emotions that everything may cause. And it is important to filter this information, or to screen this information and translate it into action from our side that is meaningful and works for the public interest, but for all the stakeholders. So so of course we have to have all these concerns in our minds when we move forward and make decisions. We have to be mindful of the unintended consequences of what we may want to do and where we may want to go. But I think that we will be on the safe side if we identify what the final output and the final goal and purpose of what we are doing is, and then work to make sure that we do it in the best way, and trying to mitigate risks and unintended consequences from our action. That's it.
Okay,
Sorry.
Mark, go ahead.
No, thank you for that. And the context is really helpful in understanding, how we put out the strategy. And I just want to pick up on one point, because we are looking at a strategy, but it is one where the precision of language is really important, because different people will have different perceptions. And I was mulling over the fact that, when we look at the vision for IESBA, we talk about the importance of raising the bar. Now, some of our stakeholders will say, great, you're raising the bar, you're making things more rigorous. Some people could say, doesn't that imply your bar is not high enough already? So they criticize you. And actually all the work we've done in the benchmarking project showed that the code is a high bar. And it's just things like that, sort of when, sometimes it is it is more the sort of innocent statement that gets read in different ways by different groups of people that sort of start these concerns running. And I think, you know, as part of our strategic discussion, it'll be really important to think what words that actually translates down into, to make sure, as Gabriella said, we don't have these unforeseen consequences. Because, you know, one thing that actually reads very positively to one person could read very negatively of the board in another way. So I just think it's helpful to bear that in mind, given the context that you've set for us. Thank you.
Sure, Mark. Thank you. And I fully agree with that. Laurie.
Yeah, just briefly, I fully agree with that as well. And look, I think it is important to raise the bar. And I was reflecting on what Ken said about some of the sense that, you know, supposedly people are leaving the profession. What I have no idea whether that's true or not, but I sometimes think one of the things we need to be really careful about when we're raising the bar is not villainizing anybody. We should be, as a professional body and as a standard setter, looking at continuous improvement. I mean, the world is moving, we have to move with it. And I sometimes think if we focus on the concept of we have to continuously improve, I mean, we have new things happening in the world, sustainability, crypto, everything, technology going on. We have to keep moving, right? Because if we don't, we are falling behind badly. So just to stay even, we have to keep moving. And that's the continuous improvement way I look at it. And then it's not so much, you know, people are good, people are bad, people are behind or not behind. It's just, you know, that's the way of the world. So
I fully agree, Laurie, and I would say that the continuous improvement that you are speaking about does not have to mean that we are becoming always more rigorous. It means that we are always trying to address the topics and the areas that we have to address, and sometimes make the same things in a different way. Does not mean that we always have to be more that the standards that we are always working to make the same standards more stringent than they currently are. It's about following the, as you say, the change.
Yeah, and I'll maybe just add one final comment on this topic, Gabrielle, and that is really the importance of taking stakeholders along on the journey. You know, that might sound very cliched, but it's, you know, when we're talking about those who have not been part of our discussions, it makes a huge difference to see them actually understand what this board is trying to achieve. Because if we don't explain things to them, they see outputs, they see pronouncements, they see statements coming from IESBA, and they're like, what does this mean, and where is this coming from? But actually talking to them and really walking them through the thought process really makes a huge difference. And actually, in this meeting with the PIB group, I mean, it took the better part of half an hour, I would say, explaining really the story behind really what IESBA is doing and why, and that really helped sort of appease some of the concerns.
Yes, and before giving the floor to Caitlin and Begonia, yes, and more than that, I would say that we have the responsibility, as you say, to bring the stakeholders with us in this journey, but we have some responsibility to help shaping some culture and some mentality, and not get passively receiving the inputs and the requests and reacting to them. I think this is also our responsibility, and this is part of some change in our own culture that is undergoing. We cannot make the change and develop against or in spite of the others and the profession, namely, but we have to go with them or to make them go with us. And that's my perspective. Thank you. Galen.
Yeah, just very briefly, and I agree with almost everything that has been said here, especially agree with what Laurie said about not wanting to villainize people. Just going back over thinking about over the last 50 years when I've been involved in the profession, I can't remember a single time when people weren't complaining about standards overload. It's always been with it. It's always, I think going forward as we continuously try to improve. I mean, going back to the Treasury Committee that I sat on 10 years ago after Sarbanes-Oxley came into play, people were worried about people leaving the profession. Again, like Lori, I don't know whether that's true or not, or to the extent to which it is. But I think we need to have a little bit of a thick skin and remember about the monitoring group reforms, that we need to be fixated on the public interest and not necessarily the interest of firms, especially when you've seen some of the failures that we have over the last 20 years or so. The problems that we've encountered as a profession, and realize that when we're moving in the public interest in that direction, we're really strengthening the profession.
Thank you very much, Galen. Laurie, do you want to come back again? Yeah, thank you. Begonia, please.
Thank you, Gabriela. Frankly, I think Galen already said what I wanted to say, that I mean, from the public interest perspective, all the things you are doing at the moment are needed, and we think I just want to encourage the board to continue with this trend of trying to introduce more ethical behavior in the preparation and the assurance of the different types of reports that companies have to prepare at the moment. And indeed, this includes, this implies to take into account that, well, you have to deal with a sort of profession agnostic issue at the moment, because there are other professions that will also work on this field. So I think that PIOB thinks that, well, we just encourage you to continue in that way. And as Galen said, there will be always criticisms. But if there are no criticisms, it means that you don't do anything. So continue in that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Begonia. Anyone else wants to provide comments? Jens.
I just thought about, Ken, your remark about the silver, which we are giving for nothing to someone else. I had similar discussions in Europe about that when we talked about the CSRD and the implementation, whether the profession should engage, yes or no. But I think after some deeper thought, everyone will agree in the profession to say that we have the once in our lifetime opportunity to set the standard as a minimum requirement or as a best practice, whatever you call it. And by that, even bringing the achievements of the profession in that respect and the USP of the profession in the right light, because otherwise others would do something which would probably be different from that what such a board as IESBA is able to do. And I think but it's necessary to give an explanation, because of the people, we have funded this for centuries and now someone is taking this for granted. Yes, but what is a wider interest, the public interest, and at the same time in the interest of the profession? So I think it's a little bit more complex. You have to say more than one sentence, and that's why we have to communicate. I think we made similar experience with a total different project with tax, for example, where we had very intensive, and thanks to Andy, with the SMP community, because they had also fears about the project, and communicating and explaining, they are not convinced of everything, but they understand why we are doing it. And I think that's a first step. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jens. Before giving the floor to others, let me just react to what you just said. I think that you all know what is my opinion about that, and about the importance of making something that is useful, that can be useful for everybody. But it's also it's a matter of public interest for sure, and it's also a matter of being convinced that what we do is valuable. If the output of IESBA's work is good for the public interest, why not widening, enlarging the scope of application and the impact? What we are really speaking about of these standards. Moreover, what I can see, and just like you said, a little bit like it happened with tax with the tax planning. If I understand that at the start we had some reactions, and we spoke about that 2 days ago, some negative reactions. What I'm seeing now is a considerable alignment between all the stakeholders around this idea and this project. And at the World Congress of Accountants, it was very clear, because I heard from many sides and stakeholders, representatives in private meetings, side meetings, informal meetings, but I heard it, people saying that on the stage in front of 7,500 people representing the profession, professional associations, regulators. There was no negative. On the contrary, there was a lot of support for that perspective. So I think that the stars are aligning, and people are starting to understand that this is in the interest of everybody, and not only in the interest of some. But of course, we have to remain attentive, and you have to understand that this can mean different things for different people. And I agree that communication, speaking, talking, explaining, it's absolutely key. Yao Shu, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. And I agree with this, the other members' comments that they should keep moving. And I think there are two aspects to improve our code. That's the depth and the breadth. And I think our strategy should focus on the depth and the breadth. Depth, that means that we need to raise the bar and to strengthen our code. And the breadth, for example, that sustainability belongs to the breadth. We need to improve the breadth of our code, and how to balance that's the depth and the breadth of our code. We should have a right balance that our strategy, and I think should find a very right balance between the depth and the breadth. Thank you.
Thank you, Yao Shu. Sanjeev.
I think just to add to what my predecessors have said, I think it is communicating which makes a very big difference. I was telling Caroline, if you look at what work has been done by the group, in the end, we are looking at the final product. But as I think someone said, 40 odd meetings went into it. When people understand what is being done and the process which it takes, I think they probably understand much more. And second, I think short term, none of us would like to comply with any additional responsibilities. But you look at the long term, I think that is what would make the difference to the profession. And I think looking at the public interest, long term, these things will always help us. That's what my view is.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev. Chana.
Thanks, Chair. My comments are sort of along the lines of what Jen says, that there's opportunity here in sustainability. And if an IESBA is in the box seat, and if the opportunity is not taken, there's a potential for somebody else to emerge and take that role of setting independence and ethics standards for sustainability assurance practitioners. So I think if we communicate, and in the longer term, I mean, I don't know the percentages, but probably accountants, as the IFAC presentation showed, the accountants are doing most of it anyway. So we are not really talking about a big percentage, although in some countries, a lot more of the other people are doing it. So I think it's in the public interest and to make use of that opportunity as well before another competitor emerges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chana. Vanya.
Thank you. Two things I would like to say. One, Chana has already said. I think that it is an initiative that is important for the profession as well, because if we accountants do not step in, others will. And what is exception now, because they are a minor part, you become greater and greater, and you occupy the space that should be of the accountants. But the other point that I would like to call attention is that not only for the profession, it is important that we have a standard, for the companies as well, because companies have already realized that sustainability must be part of the business in the future. When we go to some sustainability event like Rio +20, a COP27, the side events from private companies are larger than the official ones from the organization of the event. So companies are reporting, and they want they need to have a basis for reporting with quality, because a very few practice greenwashing, and the end result of that is that many of the information that the company gives about their sustainability initiatives are looked at with some kind of challenge, some kind of mistrust. So if we have a basis for them to report, they will be able to give evidence for their information, which will make the information they provide more useful for the market in a whole. That's my perception.
Thank you very much, Vanya. Sadia.
Good morning, everyone. Like others, I agree with what has been mentioned before. I think that the strategy provides an ideal opportunity for us to provide clarity on professional agnostic standards. It's in the public interest for us to consider this here because of comparability and understandability. But also it's important for us to clarify what we mean by it. I think in an earlier conversation, we had a question about whether it's professional agnostic standards for everything, or is it only on the independent sustainability requirements? There's also a consideration on whether we will have a primary user of the code and a secondary user. So when we draft, are we drafting for the professional accountant first, and then considering whether this is fit for purpose for others? And then I think the bigger question with time would be, how do we know we are testing if this is understandable and acceptable by other users? Because that's a target audience we previously haven't delved into. So exciting times, but also a process will be helpful.
Sure, as exciting as challenging times. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment. Well, I'd say, Sadia, and picking up on what you just said, that this is and what others said, this is an incredible opportunity for IESBA, the opportunity of taking sustainability as a lever or as a trigger to trigger a different approach and a different working methodology and etc. But I think that we should think bigger. I'm not saying, and don't be too much afraid. I'm not saying that we have to do everything in one day and that we have to embrace an enormous project of changing everything. But I think that we should really think in this strategy and work plan as this sustainability project as the lever or the instrument to trigger a different approach from IESBA to what we want to do. What's our purpose? What's the ultimate goal of what we are doing? And also to, as we are saying before, taking stakeholders with us. Because going back what Ken mentioned, that is a little bit the fear of stakeholders, that if we keep on doing, developing new standards, keeping the bar higher, etc., getting more rigorous, that the people will leave the profession. But I would respond to that question, to another question. What if we don't do it? What happens? What if we stand still and don't follow the changes, the changes in the scrutiny, in culture, etc.? What if we don't do anything? Will the profession, and this is just to think about the profession, not to think about the public interest. Is that in the interest of the profession? Will the profession be relied upon in the near future if everything stands in the same way? People don't leave the profession, but don't think that the public interest will recognize this as an appropriate way. And so something will change that will work against it all and will work against the public interest. So I think that there is no alternative. The professional accountants have a unique positioning as a profession because they have the public recognition and public reliance for an incredible number of things and activities. It's growing, and me and Geoff, we heard, and Sanjeev, we heard it very recently. We got a map, and I expect to receive it today because I think it's something that the EIOC should look at. An incredible map of initiatives, namely in Europe, regulatory initiatives that are saying, this has to have independent audit. This has to be subject to independent audit. This and that and that and that, and an incredible number of things. So regulators are still not only relying on in the profession, but in some way widening the scope of activity. But this is subject to the level of confidence and reliance that they may have in the profession. Otherwise, other things may happen. Look at what happened, for instance, with the credit rating agencies, where there was a deregulatory dependence, regulatory dependence movement, because there was the confidence was harmed, and so regulators said, if we can't trust them, let's not rely on them, etc. So this is, I think, also our responsibility to make the picture clearer about what may happen in the future if we don't challenge the today's fear of getting more constrained, of getting more additional burden, etc. I think this is the only approach that we can take as a standard setter to deal with what is changing. One additional note, and I think that this is also related with Begonia, with what Begonia said. What's happening is also has also to do with the growing relevance and importance of ethics in everything and everywhere. I would mention, and Jens can probably confirm it, that for the first time, the corporate governance principles from OECD will have the word ethics in their overarching principles. And this is only a word, but I tell you, and I know what I'm speaking about, this is the result, or I mean, this is a great achievement because historically, corporate governance principles, codes, etc., they resist to go in that direction. Mark can possibly also confirm that. Though these are baby steps, which mean giant steps, but which also means that ethics is growingly getting momentum, getting importance, getting relevance, and we are, of course, this is an opportunity for us, but also a big challenge because people don't know exactly what this means. Some of them, as Begonia was telling me yesterday, some think it's too technical. Others think that this is about morals or blue sky thinking. And we have to find not only the right place and the right positioning, but also the right narrative and communications to make people understand how important it is and how why is it getting more important. Sorry, Caroline, I didn't see you wanted to speak, Caroline.
Thanks, Gabriella. I just put up my card, so it's okay. I think that you know what we are doing is really we're on the right track. It's really about trust in the profession and how in standard setting we can help to build that trust in the profession. And the focus of the board has been in the past on independence of the auditors because there have been regulatory instances where auditors have not complied with independence requirements, and that creates perception that the auditor is not independent, and it could also impact independence of mind. And we've gone quite a long way in strengthening independence requirements. But what we see now is that there are a lot of reports on corporate failures. And so anytime there's adverse news, whether it's related to the auditor or to companies, it actually has an impact on the profession at large. And so there is a need to address the professional accountants in business. And some of the corporate failures might not be a result of failures on the part of professional accountants in business. It could be other accountants who are non-PAs. And so on our side, we should raise the bar for professional accountants in business and also work with the national standard setters and PAOs to create that distinction, really that there's a different badge that professional accountants wear compared to any accountant that doesn't have that association with a professional accountancy organization. And in doing so, hopefully we then can address the trust issues in the profession. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Mark.
I think Caroline makes a very strong point, and you know, sort of looking at the reform process that we're going through in the UK at the moment, there are three strands: the auditor, the preparer, the professional accountant, and the director. And the thing that comes out very starkly is that you shouldn't have different thresholds that should apply to those three different streams. Actually, the importance of high standards of ethical behaviour and the same high standards of ethical behaviour should apply across all three. And there's no reason why it should be easier to criticise the conduct or the behaviour of one rather than another. So therefore, the opportunity that we have is almost the creation of a level playing field with high standards. And what we do through the development of this strategy will be part of advancing that message.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Mark. And I think that having a framework where some of people involved in the same issues and the same activities, where some of them have strong ethics standards that they have to abide by, and the others don't, creates, it's not a matter of unlevel playing field, it's a matter of bad governance and very difficult problems treated at the governance level that make it very difficult to work for the together for the public interest. Not saying that that they are one and the same; they have different roles, and the professional accountants will always have this public trust, formal public trust, because they can do things that others can't, and this is because there is public trust on them. But that high ethical standards that they have to comply with should be applicable to the others in the same environment and in the same structure. So, but this is of course a strategic approach. We can't, on our side, we can't do anything, but we should do everything that we can to make that possible, at least, and to make possible that others make the appropriate decisions to create an appropriate ecosystem, ethics ecosystem therein. So I don't see anyone else wanting to speak. And with this, thank you very much for this very insightful and inspired conversation. Which we are not yet done with the strategic and work plan consultation document discussion, but so far I think that this is a very good December discussion, because it somehow translates what we have been doing and discussing over these last months. So thank you very much, Jeff. I don't know if Karen, so Jeff.
Thank you, Gabriella. So we'll just keep moving, and I think some of the discussions we have already, you will see the threats certainly coming through from the, a little later in the drivers and the themes and the actions already. But first, we want to get your input on our draft strategy vision. So I'll just read that out to you first, and then I'll unpack it a little bit more. The IESBA's vision is to achieve global recognition and acceptance of its ethics, including independence standards, as being a linchpin to public trust in the production, reporting, and assurance of financial and non-financial information, That is fundamental to the proper functioning of financial markets and economies worldwide. If I could just unpack it a little bit more, and then we'll invite your comments. This vision essentially really just we try to connect, and as we've heard from the board already in that last discussion, really connecting our standards and the code with helping our users to maintain and build public trust in their work. It recognizes that it's more than just financial information, but also non-financial information, and not just on, I guess, reporting and assurance of those types of information, but also production in a sense of trying to capture the other types of services that the profession are involved in, for instance, tax advice and other types of consulting and advisory services. We have, of course, taken into account the sustainability work that we are already doing in developed profession agnostic standards. So we haven't, you can see there it's not just focusing on the accountancy profession, because we do see the opportunity, as the board have seen, into really expanding its influence into the work of those who are not from the accountancy profession at this stage, particularly on sustainability reporting and assurance. This vision, draft vision, also recognizes the importance of having that global recognition, acceptance, or the global adoption of the IESBA standards. We have heard from the board already that we need to continue to progress and continue to set high ethical bars for the users of our standards, and the code will also promote global consistency. So that's a bit of an explanation of this vision. Of course, with vision, you can put a lot of things in it, but you don't want to make it into a war and peace novel. So you want to keep it short as well, but convey some of these key messages. So I think this will, just before I pass it back to Gabriella, invite the board to provide their views. The PC have discussed, whether we should ask our stakeholders for input on our vision, but we felt that this is more really should be set by the board and not necessarily having a sort of open-ended exchange, by inviting stakeholders to comment on it. So, it'd be good to hear the board's view on this as well, whether you want to put this out for consultation and for input as well. So with that, I'll pass it back to Gabriella, and we'll invite input from the board.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey. I will not say anything else at this stage. I think that this slide and what you have just said has been already, it well reflects the discussion and the comments that we had before. But anyway, I'd like to listen to the board on this. Christelle.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have 3 points, questions.
Christelle, if you don't mind bringing the mic closer to you, thank you.
It's not getting until mine. Yeah, is it all right? So I have 3 points that I wanted to raise, which points or questions. I lack a little bit of society at large in the fact that at the end of the vision sentence, we talk about financial markets and economies worldwide. And with what we're doing, I like a little bit of enlarging the scope of the public interest. The second one is it would be a good occasion to include the word sustainability. And I think if we add financial and non-financial information / including sustainability, would pose what is going to be the future for quite a time, in our work stream and in what we're going to do. And the last point is I was starting the document and I had to go to my dictionary because linchpin was not known. So I wonder if anybody else had the same problem. I think if this is a message that we're going to use usually, etc., maybe there is another word that we could use that would be more not common, but you see, common understanding at least.
Thank you, Christelle. If I may react to your comments, the first one, I fully understand you, and I think that we have to make a decision whether to go a little bit further on financial markets, economies, and the society as the final result, because it's what we are working for. It's for people, etc. On sustainability, I think we can do some tweaks there, or the sustainability information, or the sustainable functioning. But I think that we can do it. And on the third one, I don't know. I like it. I think it's the reflection of what we have been doing, which is working with others that are not professional accountants. This is more an engineer work, one for engineers. So it's inclusive, but I'm not the best one to say if it's appropriate or not. Ken.
No, I mean the word. I was going to say the word linchpin conjures up images of the pre-industrial times when the carts were hooked onto the oxen, and if you don't have that linchpin, well, the cart won't be able to be pulled forward.
Yeah.
So that's the image. But anyway, I mean, we can use a word, an alternative word like cornerstone or something like that. That may be more understandable.
One of the reasons why I like it, I think it's because it's very it has a visual impact. But we can change it if it's not appropriate. Felicia.
Thank you, Gabriela. I think it's a good vision overall. Given what we've discussed and what we've seen in the past, I think it's a fairly good vision. My view is that maybe the wording could change a little bit. One, to achieve global recognition, I think it's already recognized. You've just mentioned that, and we've seen the statistics that 130 countries recognize the IESBA code. So I would imagine if you use maybe global adoption, like what Jeff has mentioned, instead of recognition, because the code is already recognized. So I think adoption is probably what we're trying to achieve than being recognized. The other element is if we keep recognition, can we say to enhance global recognition? So either we say to enhance global recognition or to achieve global adoption, because that's what we're trying to achieve at the end of the day. Thank you.
Okay, more ambition. It's what I want, and I think that it also relates with what Mark had said about the words counting, for people not to think that we are not doing well, but that we have to do even better. Okay, thank you, Sungnam.
Thank you. It's my second year in the board, and this is the first time for me to think about vision. And I tried to find something in our homepage, official homepage. There was nothing. And then my question is why we discuss this thing only for the purpose of establishing SWP? Is this what one project for SWP? So my question is, and also we need to think about, I believe, how we can best utilize this vision in the future once we decide. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sungnam. I think that is a very good question. But being ambitious, I think that having in mind the discussion that we are having here and the positioning and the approaches of the board members, I think that we can easily pick up this vision and make it our vision as a board. Of course, it's not static; it may change over times, but I think that that is a very good point. Thank you. Well, Yeah, sorry, Vanya.
Thank you, Chair. Just to observation, I would not replace Inchpin as well, because if a more common word, people will read it as, oh, okay, but linchpin you give pause, you make them then reflect on what they read, and then we will have opportunity to go deeper. Also, I would not replace financial and non-financial information for sustainability, because we are an educated public. We know that when we mean sustainability, we are referring to both, but the market in general associate sustainability to non-financial information to the exclusion of everything else. So I think that that's not the idea that we want to transmit here. We can make reference to the word sustainability, but not replacing. Addition. I'm just complimenting you. So Jeff, no. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Vanya. I think we can include the word sustainable somewhere in the last part. Proper functioning or proper and sustainable, or we can think about it. Thank you. Sadia.
It's a minor editorial, but because it's the vision, all editorials become important. I would like to suggest the inclusion of the word leadership. So when we say linchpin to public trust in the production, reporting, assurance, those seems like process driven. And I hope that we can also talk to the behavior and the leadership responsibilities of PAs and others.
Very good point. Thank you, Jeff and Ken. I think we can work on that as well. Well, Felicia, do you still want to speak? No. Okay, thank you very much to all of you. Jeff, back to you.
Thank you, Gabriella. I guess we would also like to get a sense from the board whether you agree we don't put our vision out for consultation and just leave it for the board's discussion. I'm hoping that this one silence means acceptance, but any kind of comments from the board that you object to that approach? Okay, so I think we'll go ahead with that approach. Thank you very much. All right. The next couple of minutes, I'll just walk through very quickly the strategic drivers with you, and then we'll invite your feedback again. These, of course, these drivers really create the opportunities and challenge for us to achieve our strategic vision. So in the draft consultation paper, you will see that we've identified 8 key strategic drivers, and we're dividing them into 2 separate groups. The first group is the environmental factors, which you've seen here. I think we've talked a lot about all these already, so I don't intend to really go into any more details. The rapidly growing market demand for sustainability information, of course, the expanding roles of PAIBs and the roles of CFOs that we've talked about. The third one, the trusted crisis and other repercussions from recurring high-profile corporate failures. Again, we have already, really brought that up already in our earlier discussion. And of course, the ongoing impact of technological transformation. So these are the environmental factors that we've identified as strategic drivers. And then the other group we have the more, we call it the operational factors. The first one is the heightened stakeholders' expectations for greater timeliness. One of the, I think, key factor is in terms of the objectives of the monitoring group recommendations. One, certainly to foster the development of timely and high quality standards that respond to an accelerating pace of change. Of course, we have the author of the recommendations here today. And the importance of being responsive and being agile. And I think we've seen that already, even now, particularly with our work on sustainability. Another strategic driver that we've identified is the imperatives of quality and global acceptance of the IESBA standards. Really the need to improve the quality of our standard and the quality of our work through getting a broader range of stakeholder inputs. So that's something that's been identified as important by some of our stakeholders. And as you would know, that this is a consistent call from the PIOB to make sure that we're not only getting views from the profession, but also from the investor groups, those charged with governance and those in corporate governance and other stakeholders. And of course, with sustainability, we need to move beyond just the profession. Another operational factor that we've identified is the global operability of the IESBA standards. This is really speaking to the need for us to coordinate and collaborate with the other global standard setters, particularly in our case with IESBA and ISSB, in terms of sustainability work stream, and we've already discussed the importance of coordination with IWSB in all our work. And we are, as I mentioned, we have improved quite a lot, over the years in terms of coordination with IWSB. Another operational factors is, of course, further raising global adoption of the code and supporting effective implementation. I think we're all aware there's the importance of this factor. So with that, I will pass back to Gabriela to invite the board for input and comments on these strategic factors or drivers.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And I will invite the board members. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Jeff. I'm trying best to figure out how to work this in, but I see words like trust crisis, global quality and global acceptance, global operability, global adoption, and so I see quality and of standards. I'm trying to figure out if there's something in here that belongs with the enforcement regime, with the one thing to develop in an ecosystem quality standards. It's another to make sure that they're being enforced and universally applied, because our vision is for quality standards, but if they're not being enforced and applied and had accountability across the board, then it did fall short. So I can't really identify where best it goes, but that notion just seems to me to be a part that I don't see in here that that I think ought to be in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Yes, Jeff.
Since there's no other board member wants to raise comments, Andy, I think that's a very good point, and I think if we were to make that clearer, I would probably put it into the global adoption, effective implementation part, because that really is part of that part of the ecosystem and how we connect with those who have enforcement responsibilities.
Yeah, that was one of the 4 areas I had circled in there, but okay. It does. And I'm less concerned geographically where it goes in these different initiatives, but that it seems to complete the loop. We develop standards in the public interest, we put them out there, they get adopted, and then if they don't get applied and enforced, then something seems to be missing in that quality chain.
Yeah, and I think that's when the raising the global adoption and perhaps even under the operability of standards in terms of coordination with global regulator groups. But we'll have a think about it and make sure that point comes across.
Right, and that ecosystem is wider if the standards are being applied for other professions as well, so that concept ought to be integrated.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We have so now. Oh yes, please go ahead, Caroline.
So actually, the focus on quality is about our standard setting process, that the engagement with the wide variety of stakeholders, such that the output from the process is of good quality, having taken into account the variety of views. I think that was the intention.
Thank you, Caroline. Sungnam.
Thank you. I agree with all the factors, environmental and operational. In correctional, I have my suggestion is in addition to the 4 environmental factors, I'd like to suggest an addition of a new challenge and or issues relating to sustainability, such as the greenwashing. This will be the first time for us to get feedback from non-PA professionals doing assurance work for sustainability. So I believe there should be light touch, even though here as part of something like corporate failures.
Sunam, do you think it would fit under the first factor in terms of the market demand for
Somewhere
sustainability?
we need to light touch, add light touch in connection with sustainability.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sungnam. Begonia, please.
Thank you. Just a couple of things that I want to highlight that from our perspective, taking into account broader groups of stakeholders is particularly important. So having considered that as a driver of the future working plan is quite I want to highlight that. And the other thing is about you already said it, but I want to mention that the close cooperation is a word you use, I think, with the IESB is really, really important, but you already know, so just to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Begonia. Sungnam, do you want to, Mark?
So I'm supportive of where you are with the strategic drivers, the factors that you set out, Jeff, and the sort of thing that then pushes me back to, and some of the comments that we've had from board members around the table, is actually we need to anchor all of this in the vision, because effectively there has to be a thread that goes through from the vision, the factors, how we then develop the strategy and what it's there to do. So I've tried to sort of give you a view of what I think could happen. I've sent you some wording of what I think the vision could be, to then have something as a headline statement that then these things actually hang off. So it's there to consider.
Thank you, Mark. No more comments. Jeff, back to you.
Thank you. Certainly any drafting suggestions will be more than welcome to send it my way. It will be early Christmas presents for me. All right, so we'll keep moving. Thank you for those comments on the strategic drivers. So the next part, we're gonna just perhaps want to seek your views on the strategic themes and the actions that are attached to those themes. We have identified 4 strategic themes, and I don't think any of those will be a surprise to anybody. First one is enhancing trust in sustainability reporting and assurance, and then strengthening the code or responding in other ways in areas beyond sustainability reporting and assurance. And the third one, further enhancing the diversity of stakeholder perspectives and the global operability and acceptance of the IESBA standards. And then the last one, widening the influence of IESBA standards through a continued focus on adoption and implementation. You will note that these 4 strategic themes, they follow reasonably closely to what we've identified in terms of the strategic drivers. And so we just want to group them into these themes and to help us achieve our strategic vision. And under each one of those, there are some strategic actions as well with sustainability. I think we've kind of spent quite a bit of time talking about those already in terms of developing professional agnostic standards and developing ethics standards for sustainability reporting as well. And in terms of the second one, strengthening the code or responding other ways beyond sustainability reporting and assurance. We've talked about the crisis of trust and the expanding role of PAIBs, the impact of technology. So under the strategic themes, of course, we have those ongoing projects, pre-commitments, and certain number of new work streams that we'll be looking at as well. But the other strategic actions, of course, relate to our ongoing monitoring function of the technology developments we've discussed yesterday in terms of the how we move forward with the technology, I guess, working groups work. And of course, we continue to monitor any emerging issues through the EIOC. And enhancing the diversity of stakeholders' perspectives. Again, we've talked about this already in terms of getting a broader range of input and views from different stakeholders. And the last one, widening the influence of IESBA standards in terms of outreaches, further collaboration with IFAC, production of non-authoritative material, and of course we have a number of post-implementation reviews coming through. Before I ask the board for comments, and I think after that we'll probably due for a break. If you look at the IESB's strategic objectives, 3 of those are very similar. Of course, they're focusing on helping the users developing quality carrying out quality assurance engagements. But in terms of sustainability, in terms of coordination with other stakeholders, the one difference is they don't have as the strategic theme in terms of adoption and implementation, but instead they focus on more about being agile in terms of moving forward a new business model under the monitoring group's recommendations. But those are captured in other parts in our standards, and similarly for adoption and implementation, that's being captured in the IESB's consultation paper and other parts of that paper. So with that, Gabriela, did you want to get views from the board before we have a break?
Yes, sure. We still have 4 minutes.
Okay.
So
talk quickly, please.
Use all the time. Andy, please.
That's a lot of pressure. The last one on adoption and implementation. So what I'm seeing is a global finish line where at the end of the finish line is trustworthy, reliable financial and non-financial information that's both prepared, trustworthy, and reliable in the public interest. So it seems there's a lot of people, and to get to that finish line, it's a relay race with a variety of different organizations having the quality of the reporting standards, the internal accountants, the assurance, and the ethics standards. So what I'm not getting in adoption and implementation is maybe this concept of integration in this global ecosystem with regard to the place that our as a linchpin, as a key with regard to the full mantle of other standards. Because unless the ethical standards is part of an integrated ecosystem with reporting, with the regulatory, with the oversight, and the accounting or the financial reporting or the sustainability standards that the IESBA will come up with. So I don't know if I'm just wordsmithing it by talking about integration, but that concept is one I wanted to just elaborate.
If I could just quickly respond to that. Thanks, Andy. I think that might come best under the global operability and acceptance of the IESBA standards, which is under the third one. I think we try to focus with that on working with other standard setters like IESBA or ISSB in terms of sustainability to make sure they are operable at a global level, and that they there's a seamless integration between those ones. Yeah, but we'll look into that and make sure that that point is clear.
Thank you, Geoff. Mark.
Yeah, it's another variation on the same theme, Jeff. I think although you have got the coordination with the IEESB in that enhancing diversity of stakeholder perspectives, the adoption and implementation to me is equally critical to mention it, because there are jurisdictions that adopt the ISAs but not the code. And actually, the more we can emphasize that the ISAs and the code are a package that together support high quality reporting and assurance driven by high standards of ethical behavior, the better. So I absolutely accept that you've got it where you've got it, but you may also need a bit of repetition, because I don't think it's a bad thing that coordination across the ecosystem is a bit like the sort of words that go through a stick of rock. They go through all of them. And I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for that. Ken.
Thank you, Gabriela. Just a suggestion really in response to the comment Andy has raised in relation to how to integrate ethics or ethics standards with the rest of the ecosystem. And I was thinking, as you were speaking, Andy, if a pictorial would get the message out very loud and clear. So rather than 1,000 words, as the saying goes, let's put a graphic there illustrating how ethics, maybe it's at the center, it's trustworthy financial, non-financial information is our destination, but what's the ecosystem around it, and where does ethics kind of fit into that piece, into the puzzle, and in a way that gets into connects into Gabriela's earlier sort of challenge to this board as to how do we get the message across as to the role of ethics and the importance of the work that this board is doing.
Thank you, Ken. And I can see the linchpin in that visual construction. One thing that I think it's worth mentioning at this stage is that coordination, that integration, that consistency and working together of the pieces is extremely important with the linchpin. But I think that we have to make sure, and this is a request that we have been hearing from our stakeholders as well, is that our standards should be kept neutral to the rest of the standards, which means that this should work, of course, and has to work together with the IESBA standards, and will, on the sustainability, hopefully work together with the IESBA standards. But we should, as much as possible, make sure that they can work together with other standards, because the things are developing so quickly that we don't know what will happen in the future. And one thing that we will have to have clear in our mind is that most probably we will have to interact, to say the least, with other standard setters and see how to make everything fit together, and of course making sure that IESBA has a strong role to play there. But that's just an additional mention. And with this, I think that if there is no other request for comments, can we break here, Jeff? Yeah. So we will break for 20 minutes, and we will come back at 10:50 or 10:51. According to my, I think it's because this clock is fast. I think it's 3 minutes fast, so no, around 10:50. Thank you. So we are still missing 1 or 2 board members, but I think that we have to restart, because we still have a few things to do this morning before we break for lunch, more than those that are in the agenda. So let's move. Jeff, can you restart?
Yes, thank you, Gabriela. Welcome back, everybody. We will move into the second part of our consultation or draft consultation paper discussion, which is the proposed work plan for 2024 to 2027. Before I go into the different tables, I just want to point out, and it is in the consultation paper as well, in terms of developing the work plan or establishing the work plan, we have, of course, considered the responses to the strategy survey. But also we will take into consideration the discussion yesterday on the TWG's phase 2 report recommendations, and of course the board have discussed, how best to include some of those elements into the consultation paper, and including what questions we might want to ask, and make sure it's clear that just because it's in the consultation paper doesn't mean it's a definite, will definitely make it to the SWP, and again, that doesn't mean that the only action is standard setting. And we have also considered the benchmarking working group's phase 1 report, and with that, I've caught up with Sylvia and also Laura, who is the chair, and they very kindly just spent some time with me, just making sure that some of those elements, as you may recall, whilst the working group didn't I guess present recommendations of what needs to be, there may be sort of enhancement opportunities, but there are a lot in the report, and so we walk through those with the benchmarking working group, certainly with Laura and Sylvia as well. Another consideration is looking at the potential impact of the transitioning to the new operating model, because there is a bit of a transition in terms of moving to the staff-based model and then changing the role of the board and the makeup of the board. In terms of delivering the work plan, again, is also in the draft consultation paper. We've mentioned about the new operating model. We need to certainly take that into consideration, as that will, progressively from 2024, we will move into that model and give us a year or two, and then we will be fully functioning in that model. So we need to take that into consideration. And also efficiency in work processes. You might recall that in our last executive session in September, we spent quite a bit of time looking, getting the board's feedback of, how we may be able to improve our work processes. And there's a lot of good ideas there, and you might have seen from the draft executive session minutes. So we'll, the PC and staff will work through those and come back to you with some other, perhaps suggestions in certainly next G in how we can improve some of these processes. And another point in terms of delivering the work plan, and I think Gabriela has mentioned it quite a few times, and other board members as well, we need to continue to be flexible and agile. Just because something is in the work plan doesn't mean we have to definitely go ahead and do that if there are other more important priorities that we need to take into consideration. So we want to make sure that our stakeholders understand that point. So with that, I will first walk through the first two tables. And the first one, table A, essentially are the ongoing projects and work streams. You would see, of course, there's sustainability, independence, ethics, and of course, the use of experts. By the time we get to the start of the next strategy period, which is start of 2024, we would expect that we would be at the exposure stage, and the board should have voted in terms of approving the proposals for exposure towards Q3 and Q4 of 2023. So at the moment, what we put there, the targeted completion is Q4 2024. The other two work streams, the first one is the collective investment vehicles and pension funds. We've also added the investment company complexes there. You would recall that and certainly with CIVs and pension funds that came out of the PI project as the board finalized the PI revisions, we made an undertaking to review the CIV and pension funds arrangements, including those arrangements relationships with the trustees, the managers, and advisors. We were also thinking that we would consider as part of that, whether the definition of related entity in the code remain fit for purpose in light of some of these arrangements. And we want to expand the discussion to also look at investment company complexes or private equity houses. And we will, of course, take into account the recent changes in the US SEC rules, and that was highlighted in the benchmarking working group's phase 1 report as well. I think one of the key things we want to highlight to the board is with this particular work stream, the research part and the information gathering part is paramount because it is quite a complex arrangement in the sense that some of these complex areas, some of these arrangements are complex, even within one single jurisdiction, they varies within one single jurisdiction. And so trying to have a global view, you know, it's challenging, complex, but certainly, so we want to spend quite a fair amount of time in terms of doing outreaches and information gathering and forming the appropriate views. So at this stage, our tentative start is in Q3 2023, around about the time when at least 2 of the sustainability work streams, or will vote for the board might vote for approval of the exposure draft. But we will look a bit more closely, I think, in the next version of the consultation paper. The next topic is the start of some of our post-implementation reviews. And the first one up is the NOCLA standards. We will look at, as we start, we will start with making sure that we've got the right scope and approach. So we're looking at starting in Q2 or Q3 2023. At the moment, we have got a targeted completion of Q2 24. It might come across as a little aggressive, but we will review that again in the next version. So these are the ongoing projects. Some of them haven't started yet, but by the time we get to 24, we would have started. And then the next table in the consultation paper is table B, which are all the pre-committed work streams that are due to commence from 2024. So there are 4 post-implementation reviews here. Long Association Phase 2, the restructure code, nets and fees and definitions of PI. Long Association Phase 2, as you will recall, the board voted and agreed on completing Phase 1 and agree that not to take any further action in terms of extending the jurisdictional provision. And so Phase 2 essentially would be looking at all the other aspects of the Long Association revisions. So that would start in end of all of these will start in Q4 earliest 2024, because of course, as you would appreciate, next year in 2024 we're gonna focusing principally next year finishing tax and we have SWP, but also into 2024 a major focus will be on sustainability and also the use of experts. Restructure code, just want to draw to the board's attention that we are not looking at the so much as substantive changes, but we are looking more from adoption and implementation perspective, those broader issues about usability, any issues in terms of translation and application. So this project was due to commence and also Long Association Phase 2 this strategy period. But of course, because of other competing priorities, we're moving this to the next strategy period. And then the other 3 post-implementation review would be NAS fees and definitions of PI. It's most likely that we will move these, we will work on these post-implementation reviews together because it makes sense, because they are interconnected. And because NAS and fees are only becoming effective end of this year and then PI in December 2024, there is no point in starting them too early. So at the moment, we put a tentative Q3 2023 7. Of course, depending on our workload at the time, there is possible that we'll push it out to the next strategy period as well. So these are our our ongoing work streams and also pre-committed work streams. So just want to see if the board has any comments on these 2 groups of work streams, and so pass it to you, Gabriela.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And I will open immediately the floor for comments. Christelle.
Yeah, Jeff, can you come back to the table A, because this is the one that was puzzling me. I think there is a risk in disclosing a too demanding timetable. So you said you are going to reflect a little bit further on that to make sure that for the last 2, the targeted completion is reasonable. My intuition is that it is a bit too challenging, that there is a high risk that it will give tension in the use of the staff and the board time, but mainly on the staff on Q4 2024. And therefore, I would suggest that even for, on a sort of a message on the focus and the concentration of means, etc., we should be a little bit more prudent. And if we can start earlier, we can always do that. But when you go out with such an objective, there is a lot of pressure, and I think we are giving ourselves enough pressure on the first 3. That's my suggestion.
Thank you, Christelle. Let me just, of course, we can and we should look at this and everything, and it's open for discussion. But with respect precisely to the first, I would say 2 at least, what we communicate and disclose is relevant, and is relevant in terms of how much our standards can and will be taken into consideration or not. We are not walking alone in this project. There is as we know, a bigger project, a global project, an ecosystem being developed, and it will very much depend on our ability to meet schedules or not, the possibility of being considered, let's say, or not. The IESB, the IESBA are aiming at having their standards completed within the same time frame. I mean, the communication is not completely clear, but I think that we don't have many space nor many room to say something different with respect to the first 2. But of course, open to discussion.
I was not talking about the first 3. These are given. We have given it ourselves.
I thought you said that the last that your last
there
was the first
potential
okay.
overlap of tension on staff if we put very challenging due dates for the last 2.
Okay, I thought it was the first 2 so that you were mentioning. Sorry, my confusion.
Thank you. I've really got sort of 2 points. The first is that, obviously it's important that we set out what our work plan is, and we do look sort of at delivering projects into the future, and we identify the pipeline. But it's slightly odd to be talking, like if we look at table B, for instance, it's slightly odd to be talking about potential projects that will complete at a point when the only person sitting around this table eligible to still sit around this table might be Gabriela. So, so I don't know. It seems such a gap between where we are now and where we are in the future that even setting out sort of indicative areas of work may be of interest, but it's not really a strategic work plan. That's sort of where I get to. And then my only other comment is in respect to the post-implementation review on the definitions of PI. I would be tempted not to go there for about 300 years, purely on the grounds that not only is the PI implementation from the code a big issue, but in a number of jurisdictions, it's going to be a really complicated issue. So for instance, in my own, we have PIs as defined in EU law, which is now retained UK law, retained EU law in UK law. Government is proposing to create a new group of PIs. We will have the IESBA PIs, and I think it will be really hard to get people to engage on the IESBA part of the jigsaw in isolation. So everyone will sort of link it to whatever other definitions of a public interest entity they're working with. So I can sort of see why you think, well, it's next on the blocks and we might want to go through it. But I think we will find it very difficult, or whoever is doing that when it comes around, will find it very difficult to engage a comparatively narrow project just purely around the IESBA definition, and therefore anticipated demand on resource certainly wouldn't be low, it would be quite big. And I think it would end up being potentially more noisy and controversial than perhaps we think it might be. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. What would be your suggestion in terms of what is there on table B? Because I can see your point, but then what?
Well, I think, obviously, I think on table A, we've got clear priorities that we're going to take forward. I think we should make clear that other things are indicative areas of focus for our work, but actually we need to be clear that those could be replaced by emerging issues that we don't even know about at this stage. So I think we should, maybe one of the things that we should say almost at the top of table B is that the board will continue its horizon scanning to identify emerging priorities and how it needs to respond to those, rather than committing to some things that may well have been overtaken by the time, the board is thinking about specifically what to approve.
I see your point. The problem is that these are pre-committed work streams, so of course nothing is written on the stone, and we can always work on it. But I wonder how could we put it in a way that we don't ignore that we have committed to do those things, but at the same time would provide us the requested the flexibility that you are speaking about. Yeah, it's food for thought. Thank you. Christelle, do you want to come back? Luigi, please.
Yeah, thank you. I am in agreement with Mark's comment, and I was phrasing them in a different way. I think that we here are trying to make the board accountable with the stakeholders in order to, let's say, plan what we would like to do. We are now identifying potential projects, due dates or timetable. What it seems to me it is missing, and probably would also help trying to balance all the comments we received so far, is to set the priorities and priorities under two types of concept, whether the project is very important and should be performed at any cost, like maybe sustainability, or whether it is important, but if there are other things emerging that are more important, we can delay, we can postpone, or we have sufficient flexibility in order to accommodate the actual plan once we have approved the strategic work plan. So, and I think that if we are able to set this priority, probably we could have in future sufficient flexibility to accommodate any emerging issue or any urgency we could have. Because I agree, planning an activity of the board with 4 years in advance. It is a good exercise. We need to do that, but maybe our visibility is not so long.
Thank you, Luigi. That may help us working a little bit on these tables and see how to put it in a way that responds to Mark's and your concerns. Thank you. Now we have Junpei. Please, Junpei.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your explanation. I would like to support the proposed work plan. I have one comment on for sustainability. It might be good that as for sustainability, we plan the work plan with a certain amount of margin, because we might need to follow up based on the actual practice in jurisdictions after the revision of the code. I believe the follow-up is very important as sustainability assurance and reporting is going to change very rapidly. I think the margin would help us keep agile for the changes. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Junpei. I think Richard Fleck.
Do you mind making a contribution
Sure,
on this particular point, Gabriela? If I may say so, I think that the post-implementation review issue has become complicated by the wider perspective, and I don't think treating it just simply as a post-implementation review is necessarily the right approach. I think, if I may say so, I think there are 3 aspects of looking back at work that's been done before. First is to see or to address gaps or something that has not worked quite as well as was intended. And that in many ways is the traditional perspective of a post-implementation review. The second is if external factors have changed the landscape, and as a result, there is a need to reconsider whether one has gone far enough, gone too far, or whether there are other areas that need to be addressed as part of that particular subject matter. My suggestion, if you'll forgive me for putting it forward, is that rather than put something into a table like this, the covering paper should recognize the commitment that was made for post-implementation reviews and then explain that whether to pursue them and how to pursue them will be affected by what issues have arisen, how the landscape has changed, and then in the light of that assessment, the priority given to the work to be done in the context of the total work program. In other words, giving oneself the room to adjust it as appropriate, whilst at the same time not denying or departing from the commitment to contemplate or to undertake a post-implementation review. I put that forward as a thought as to how to manage this particular issue.
Thank you very much, Richard. I must say that I have some sympathy for you for that approach, but I at the same time don't have the enough history from this strategy and work plan work to say or to be clear about whether this should be acceptable or not. But we can also consider that when we go back to this document, having in mind what has been mentioned by Mark and Luigi, and it may probably translate the perspective of many other stakeholders, and having that proposal, which should be slightly different from what we have here, but it would be, as far as I understand, a general and of course firm commitment from the board to address these topics as soon as possible, not committing with specific dates and priorities with respect to this post-implementation review. I don't know, Ken, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you, Gabriela. I know just some reflections really, and these are all very good comments, and certainly the planning committee and staff should take those on board and try to envisage how best to accommodate sort of the input, and I fully appreciate that that the message that we're seeing coming out from the slides perhaps is perhaps too strong. You know, when we say targeted completion, it's perhaps in a way forcing the board's hand in terms of delivering, for example, on a post-implementation review of the restructured code by mid-2026. And yes, things change very fast. And my observation is, by the time we get to the beginning of the strategy, the new strategy period, we will find that the landscape will have changed so much. And 2 years in the world we're living in is an enormously long period that all the sort of dominoes will have to be rearranged, and we'll find that actually there are more important priorities. So I think we can take all of this on board and find a way to message it in a way that gives the board maximum flexibility as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Ken, and thank you, Richard, again for that suggestion. Begoña.
Thank you, Gabriela. Well, my comment is first to say that we are impressed with, in terms of due process, about how this development of the draft for the consultation paper is done, and how the proposals for the next 4 years, not next 4 years, next 4 years after 24, which is quite a long period. That's one of the things that when you were talking about this, I realized that this is really a long, long period. That said, well, we are really pleased to see that those items that appear in table A, they are more or less already working. And in 23, they will be more or less finished, perhaps to be ended in 24. So that means that there is sort of, well, things are advanced. We are very pleased to see that the sustainability reporting has been addressed with the addition of the external experts, and also the CIB that was suggested by the PIOB when we talk about the PIs last year. Okay, so this table, we understand that it's going to be worked and it's going to be finished relatively soon. But the others, I realized after listening all of you, this is my personal impression, that this is a much more difficult exercise, because we are talking about a long term and things are happening very quickly, and you might have to address other things that emerge in the process. So I don't know, I just say that I understand that the concerns, but doing this exercise with such a long process, such a long horizon is quite an impressive exercise. But if you have to do it, you have to do it. But this idea of including flexibility makes a lot of sense, because otherwise it's going to be difficult. I remember you said yesterday something, Gabriela, about starting a project and not having it perfect from the beginning. And I like that idea, because things have to move, although you might need more time later to improve them. That makes a lot of sense. But well, for the time being, I think that table A is more or less clear. Table B, but table C is perhaps, I don't know if we will need to make changes in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Begoña. Indeed, this is a long period, and this is also my perception when I first started looking at the strategy and work plan work when I joined, and I asked myself, how are we going to be able to understand what we will have to do in 4 years' time, 5 years' time, etc. But it's really a necessary exercise. Considering the way things are moving and changing, I think it's a mix of planning and guessing, and therefore the agility and the capacity to adjust, I think it will be key for the success of the IESBA's work. So I don't see anyone else. Ken, do you want to?
Yeah, and maybe just a final thought on this matter, Gabriela. I would suggest maybe the board commits as a matter of diligence more than anything to undertaking a strategic review, not in so much in a formal manner, but within its own midst, around the end of 2024, which is the sort of horizon we're looking at in terms of delivering on new sustainability related standards. And if the board were to commit to that sort of strategic review, then that should give this board's at least a degree of reassurance that it is going to take stock of where it is in the sort of in the process on the timelines, and what it might then wish to decide in terms of new priorities or reprioritizations and so forth. So if we were to have that within our process, then at least we know that we will get to that point where we will kind of pull back, stand back, and kind of look at the context and the situation again.
Thank you very much, Ken. So with this, Jeff, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Gabriella. The last part we want to touch on essentially table C, which is the potential new work streams that the board might be carrying out. Just a quick reminder, this was tabled at the last board meeting in Nashville as well, just to refresh your memory in terms of input from IOSCO and some of the other regulators in NSS. They've certainly highlighted independence of external experts as one of the key work streams that we should engage in, and which we are doing that already. In fact, in this current period, so we can take that off already, and some of the other ones, audit firm, audit client relationships, and business relationships, and then to a lesser extent, breaches of the code and definitions of descriptions and terms. So with that, certainly want to get the board's view on some of these proposed or suggested work streams that we will put into the consultation paper to get feedback from our stakeholders. The first one, again, I certainly acknowledge the comments about the targeted perhaps commencement and completion. So we'll take that into consideration in the next version to make sure there's clarity about agility, feasibility, and perhaps sort of a mid-cycle review type activity. But the four topics we've got here: business relationships, definitions and descriptions of terms, and audit firm or the client relationship, and role of CFO. I'll just have a very quick brief description and just to bring up some points to the board, and then we'll open to the board for your feedback, whether we should include any of these in the consultation paper. In terms of business relationships, of course, we recognize that the technology task force have already done some work in terms of relating to close business relationships with this. I think this potential work stream is more of a broader review of broader business relationships, and we'll take into account also the BWG's reports in terms of its comparison with the US SEC rules, particularly in terms with respect to the materiality exception in section 520, but also in loans and guarantees in section 511, which was also brought up by IOSCO as well. Definitions and descriptions of terms, essentially about aligning terms between the code and IESBA standards. And we were also looking at reviewing other terms like PAIBs and PAPPs. In terms of audit firm and audit client relationship, I think that the focus of this potential work stream will be largely on the term audit client, and we have received some input and comments from respondents to this survey about whether this is the most appropriate term, or whether we should look at changing it to terms like audited entity or entity subject to audit. Of course, it's not just a matter of just changing the words. There are some pretty sort of deep implications. So if we were to continue with this work stream, there's quite a large body of work behind it. But under this work stream, one of the things we're suggesting the board to look at is also to I guess, to explore more, looking at reviewing the code and in its entirety, looking at whether it continues to provide framework that addresses some of the potential risk or impacts that arising from the audit firm or the client relationships. This is something that was first discussed under the fees project, and they help sort of dealt with it in part, but certainly the board at that time considered it is a broader topic, and perhaps this could be addressed at a later date. So that could be part of what this work stream will look at as well, very much in terms of just getting some views rather than, we are going to change the code because of this. The other potential work stream that was not in the that was not in the survey was this last one, which was the role of CFOs and other senior PAIBs. I think we felt that we should include this just because of the feedback that we've received from our stakeholders in terms of the expanding role of CFOs, and therefore potential new ethical challenges that they may face. And so this work stream is more about research and information gathering, certainly at the start anyway. And we would be looking at perhaps collaborating with some of our other stakeholders, whether it is others PA or national PAOs, or whether we work with our IFAC colleagues. So that's another work stream that we are thinking of including in the consultation paper. Now, of course, we have discussed some of the technology working group's recommendations yesterday, and of course, our staff and the planning committee will go back into looking at how we best include them in the consultation paper. Before we get the board's feedback, I just want to also highlight that in the consultation paper, we have included some possible new work streams. They are included in as possible new work streams. Essentially, we don't feel that these are, essentially we felt that these are perhaps more the low priority, and perhaps the board might even decide that we don't include some or all of these in the consultation paper. But just to bring to your attention, documentation, we did discuss it briefly in the national meeting. This is a work stream that is in fact in the identified in the current strategy and work plan as a possible work stream if there's time and space. So this is something, this came out of, I believe, early on from a safeguards, from the safeguards project, which the board was working on a few years ago. And so we've added that at this stage as a possible new work streams. The other one is the QM related conforming amendments. These are a couple of issues relating to networks that was identified as part of the QM conforming amendments project. And the last one in breaches of the code. If I can just draw the board's attention that we're not talking about breaches from the independence perspective. We are really just looking at the breaches provisions in the extent in section 100 of the code. So just the other types of breaches essentially. So the suggestion is to look at whether we need to strengthen these provisions. Again, I would say that this is low priority. Just to draw the board's attention, some of the other activities, in addition to these work streams, of course, we will continue to have the EIOC. And also we will have the technology work. Of course, we will be doing a fair amount of outreaches in next year, but also in the new strategy period as well. And there will, of course, be production or at least commissioning of non-authoritative materials. So with that, just want to get the board's feedback on these potential or proposed new projects, work streams in Table C, and also some of the new possible work streams. So with that, I'll pass it to you, Gabriela.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and I will immediately open the floor for comments with respect to this part of the presentation. No comments? Mark.
Well, I destroy the place. Just on your table C, Jeff, to my mind, and I think we've said it for a long time in our correspondence with the board, the audit firm, audit client relationship one, although rather totemically around this definition of audit client is quite an important one. And I might suggest that that should be at the top of the list rather than midway down it. And also I think it should be something that's prioritized in perhaps a slightly shorter time window than 2 years, because I do think this has been a sort of long running public interest issue. With regards to your other question about should other things be slotted in, I think we've already got quite a lot to do. And although we can reserve the right to add more things in as the period goes on, I don't really feel that we need to do that at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. That's good news. Rich, please.
So I'm looking at this C and then some of the materials. When are we going to, we've already got timeframes slotted out for 4 projects for which this board hasn't even agreed to put it in the SWP, let alone take it on as a project. And I'm kind of interested when you're going to give us sufficient detail to understand what these projects entail. And we might all have individual views on individual projects from what we can read in here, but I don't know that what's in this document gives sufficient explanation for readers who are going to try to comment on the SWP to put that in there. And actually, I'm actually going to take an opposite view of Mark on audit-client relationship. From what I'm reading here, what do you meaningfully think you're going to do about the fact that the fees are paid by the client? We don't really have authority over that. And so if that's what the project's about, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It may be about something else, but we don't have the information to understand that here or on several of these other projects or some of the other ideas of opportunities. And so, we might be in favor of all of them, but it's a little hard to put the priority around them also until we have a better understanding of what we're going to try to pursue in that project. So thank you.
Thank you, Rich. I don't know if Jeff or Ken want to add anything to what I'm going to say, but I understand your point. But at the same time, I think that there is some information in the document about these being requests that we have received. And what we are going to do in this document is, this is a consultation paper, so it's exactly what we are seeking or asking for is more information that may help us understand if this is a priority or not. So we are not in the stage or in the moment of making a decision that this is going to be our strategy and work plan, and these are going to be the projects that we will undertake, but rather, and namely with respect to this table, rather trying to collect additional evidence and information about if this is important or relevant enough for us to include them in our priorities. But Ken, I'll give it the floor to you.
Yes, thank you, Gabriela. And I think it's important to the board, and that's a fair challenge that Rich has raised. But I think it's important for the board to recognize that we're not going into the strategy and work plan and all these items in table C blindfolded with our blinkers on and not actually knowing what these various items might be about. We know that there are a number of questions that have been raised in relation to those different topics. I mean, just earlier we had a discussion about the role of PIBs and why ethics is important to them. Really putting those items, if you will, within the SWP is a signal for two stakeholders that the board will look at those areas very intently, and as needed, will undertake the fact finding that will provide the evidential basis for the board to consider a project proposal. If there is indeed enough in the way of issues, questions, whatever you want to call it, for the board to then to say, yes, it would be in the public interest to consider and launch a project. So as I say, we're not going into those different areas blind. Just for example, definitions of and descriptions of terms. We know that there have been a number of questions that have been raised in terms of the consistency of definitions between terms that are in the code and terms that are in the IESBA standards. And we have looked at those, and yes, we see it is a fact that those definitions are not aligned. And let us have a look at those. But we're not at this stage yet where, let's say in table C on those 4 items, we have all the evidential basis already for the board to approve a project right now. That is not the case. We have enough of those questions to put those items on the table for consultation. And yes, stakeholders might come forward and say, we don't agree these questions are at a level of threshold in the public interest for IESBA to commit resources to addressing those issues. On the other hand, we might hear different views. And Mark has raised a perspective, admittedly from a regulatory perspective in relation to the 3rd item and the terminology we have in the code. And not so much whether the fees are being paid by the client, Rich, to your point, but in terms of the messaging that the code is giving when it's referring or using the term audit client, and whether that is the right message. Because in the audit context, clearly, we all understand and appreciate that the ultimate client is actually the shareholders or the owners of the particular entity that is subject to audit. So I think it's fair enough for us to be challenged to really articulate the questions and the issues as much as we can, understanding that in a number of those questions, we may have to do further work. And as I've given some examples already, like in the area of PIBs, do we know already what might be some ethics issues or whatnot? But all of these will merit some reflection and some appropriate work for us to kind of explore the issues and come up with, as I say, the evidential basis that will provide the support for the projects, if indeed we go forward with projects.
Thank you very much, Ken. Hiro.
Thank you, Gabriela. I have a comment on the last one, role of CFOs and other senior PAIBs. It is planned to start 2026. I'm wondering if it is too late, given that one of the strategic drivers are expanding role of PAIB and CFO's role. And if this project is focused on information gathering and fact finding and also anticipated demand on resources role, maybe we can start earlier. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
I think that that's a fair point. That is not completely consistent with the priority that we have established a few slides before. Thank you, Hiro, for that point. Chana.
Thanks, Chair. I think when I look at the sum of the projects, another categorization you could have is strategic versus operational / housekeeping. I see the definitions and descriptions of terms, QM conforming amendments as more housekeeping matters, while, for example, the professional accountant in business, like Hiro just mentioned, I see that as more strategic, as Caroline mentioned earlier today. You know, there's been a lot of focus on the auditor independence aspect, but what about the other players in the financial reporting supply chain, like the professional accountants in business? And so I think that is a bit more strategic, and as Hiro says, can be started a bit earlier. And maybe that could be also linked with the breaches. As Andy said, enforcement, we know the auditors are getting looked at by the regulators, but there's not enough enforcement with respect to the PIBs. So I think there could be some categorization between strategic and housekeeping projects and that we should elevate the PAIB project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chana. Also because I think that we should, IESBA as a standard setter for professional accountants, we should leverage on the relevance and the unique nature of our standards in terms of the space that they have in for CFOs and PIABs. As you said, there is no regulation, there is no almost no oversight from regulators, etc. So we have this is really an area where we have a unique space of action and intervention that we should take profit and leverage on. Thank you for that, Sadia.
My comment might be very similar to Chana's, but using different words. I was wondering about the synergies between projects and the timing of them. So if I look at the project definition and description of terms, and this is owing to what Rich says, whenever we read these projects, we have a pre-understanding of what we think they're going to be. But I was wondering if this would be after post-implementation reviews, so we get a holistic project, or do we deal with this project as part of other projects? As we come across terms and definitions that need revamping, we do it within projects. The other thing I wanted to mention was in the next slide, we talk about documentation. And for me, documentation really speaks to that implementation strategic pillar that we have, whether how people are consuming the code and implementing the code and what support they may need in those respects. It says documentation, but I'm also thinking about systems that are for ethics that each firm needs and whether they have the necessary support in having those. The last one was just on how we package our consultation paper, because we have breaches of the code as possible new streams, but 2 slides up in that 4-quadrant slide, at least everyone has identified breaches of the code as something that they would have wanted. So did they mean independence, or did they mean holistically breaches of the code and whether we are aligning them correctly? Thank you.
Thank you, Sadia. Galen.
Great discussion, I think. And so, but on the, my focus would be on where can this board affect behavioral change. And I do like the definitions and description of terms as a topic. I agree with the comments that Ken and Mark had previously said. Until we get auditors thinking about who their responsibility is to, I think that could be a transformative thing. It does sound fairly simple, but that messaging of who is our client and the public interest aspect of that is very important. I think auditors are always going to refer to whoever they're auditing as their client. We're never going to change that, I don't think. But at least in the standards, if there was an indication of who, the reference to audit client or audit entity, maybe it'll make people think a little bit more about their ultimate responsibility. And then on the role of CFOs and other PAIBs, I do think that's an important step, but I'm not sure how the board is going to affect behavioral change based on what you said, Gabriela, because we don't have the regulatory, maybe some jurisdictions in the US on public entities, there's some linkages to the certification of financial statements. I think in the UK as well, but not throughout the world. So I really I struggle with that a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Galen. Caroline.
Thank you, Gabriela. Just to respond to Galen's last comment, when I participated in discussions or meetings with OECD, that was one question they asked about what would the impact be enforcement if a PAIB doesn't comply. And really it goes back to firstly the professional accountancy organization. And if we do not within our code set a high ethics bar or encourage that change in behavior, then the professional accountancy organization really has no legs to stand on to enforce the right disciplinary action. And if we want to take it the next step in terms of regulatory actions, again, it first has to start with the standards requiring and setting that higher expectation and requirement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Jens.
I think Caroline gave the right notion to the OECD, and I witnessed the same experience last week in Paris during the consultation, because it was interesting to see they started with sustainability, then they looked at the whole value chain, and then they questioned also for the financial part, the ethic piece. So it was more a holistic discussion. And I don't think that from one day to another, we will become a standard setter for CFOs, but to demonstrate how our fundamental principles and the conceptual framework are able to enhance ethical behavior in this context, whether it is under our regime, yes or no, but it shows a best practice which can be used by others, for example, OECD or someone else, to look at this. And by highlighting this, we are also strengthening our approaches towards those who are under our regime, so to say.
Right, and this is how why it is so important. And I wanted to mention that for the first time, the OECD accepted to include something in their principles in this respect, because corporate governance. This is about corporate governance, but corporate governance has to embed ethics necessarily. So I think that they opened the door, and they opened the front door. The fact that they didn't mention it once, that doesn't mean that it was a timid result. They opened the front door, and so the door is open for us to step in. CFOs are caught within the corporate governance structures and principles, and so I think it's the start of a journey. But yeah, we have to. Ken, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriel. I was going to respond to Galen's challenge to this board as to whether it's really worthwhile to dedicate time, resources, etc., to even look at PIBs, given the context that actually it's hard. It's hard to enforce the standards on them. Although it's not the role of this board to deal with enforcement, but we recognize that the reality is that around the world, enforcement is very uneven, and PAOs have different levels of resourcing to monitor and supervise their members, and that is a challenge. But I would maybe turn it around and argue the other way, which is to say that this board is and I might say it in a bit of a selfish way, but this board is the only game in town in relation to setting global standards, and therefore it behooves this board to take a leadership role in that area. And whenever we think about being a leader, it is an uncomfortable place to be, because you're sticking your neck out, you're sort of expanding the horizon, and there's risk. There's risk that you might fail. There's risk that you might trip over and end up in a bad spot. But that is the role of a leader, and this board is an international board, and it behooves this board to take a leadership role. And the example I would use as to the influence this board standards is having already is in relation to the legal profession. And the legal profession, as we speak, is looking to developing a standard along the lines of NOCLAR. Why? Because it has recognized that it is under pressure. It is under pressure precisely because of the sorts of discussions that have been happening in forums like the OECD, and where there have been a lot of discussions about the role of the professions and the perception that they are enabling, tax crimes and other crimes and so forth. And lo and behold, the accounting profession has a standard like NOCLAR, but not the legal profession. And I have already been engaged in them because they're very interested in understanding the journey this board has traveled in developing a standard dark nuclear. And they are, as we speak, they are exploring what they can do on their side to come up with a standard dark nuclear that will really put up the bar or raise the bar, if you will, for lawyers and so forth. So the standards that this board sets, yes, they're going to be out there. Will they have influence? They might well have influence, but it might not be immediate. But you will see that over time, actually, they are bringing about change and change in the public interest.
Thank you very much, Ken. China.
So just to add a few more points. So in similar to what Galen said for US and UK, even in Australia, the CFOs need to certify the accounts. So they do have a role there, and I'm sure it's across a lot of countries where there's a Good Corporations Act that would say that they need to, the CFO for at least the listed entities need to certify the financial statements. And just using some statistics from Australia, this is a code for professional accountants, all. And the Australian statistics is only 8% of the profession are in audit, 22% are in other services like forensic accounting, valuations, and so on. And then 70% is professional accountants in business. So are we sort of ignoring 70% of the population? Thank you.
That's a very relevant point. Yeah, and I think that we should reflect upon this because we are probably we probably have to gather more information and put a little bit more thinking in this area and see what's in it for us. Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. Back to you.
Okay. Gabriel, perhaps I propose that we don't look at the proposed questions at this point. I think we have very good discussions so far. Perhaps just quickly let the board know that in terms of the milestones coming up, and thank you for all your comments today. They're certainly very helpful. And if you have any additional comments or feedbacks or drafting suggestions, please do let me know. So going forward in Q1 2023, we're looking at approving the consultation paper. And when we do that, we are looking at releasing it in sort of probably March, maybe latest early April. And then in Q3 2023, we will then look at reviewing the comments, and then Q4 2023 approving the SWP, which IESBA, as I understand, have a similar timeline. Certainly they will approve their SWP in 2023 as well. So at this stage, quite possible we are certainly looking at in September have a joint plenary meetings to discuss the two SWPs to make sure that we do coordinate properly. And of course, in Q1 2024, we're looking at getting the PLB approval. So that's sort of our milestones at going forward. So with that, I think that's the end of our presentation. So again, thank you very much for everyone's comments. It's very well received. And back to you, Gabriela.
Thank you very much on my side. Thank you, of course, for the excellent work done with this document and this proposal, but above all, also for this discussion within the board, which I think it was a very good discussion, not only to kick off with our strategy and work plan, but also to this is an opportunity for alignment, internal alignment of the board around purposes, objectives, principles, values, and ambition. And then what I can see here is a very relevant alignment, which is a source of happiness to me, because it's as a board is exactly how we should be. It doesn't mean that we all agree on the same things, which is also healthy, but the substantive contributions today and the high level of ambition in the good sense of making good things is very impressive and visible. So thank you very much for this. I think we are in the right we are going in the right direction as a board. And with this, I think I will ask you for 30 seconds for just to because we have to. I mean, what we should do next was the executive session. We should have James, but he had to leave. But I think that we have Brett. But in between, we should aim at approving the technology project. Yeah, so let's try to do it without going too much into your lunch time. What happened yesterday was that, as I said, the task force managed to do the turnaround of the documents, for which I'm very thankful in integrating what the board's comments and making it possible for us to go for a vote on the technology project today rather than next week, as it was suggested. So let's try to do it and then open the executive session, asking Brett to be patient. I think that Brett is there. I can't see him, but to be patient because it will take us a little bit more longer than expected. So Rich, Cam, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Based on the feedback provided both before and during the meeting, including some after yesterday's session, the task force got together and has made some final adjustments consistent with being responsive to all that. We're going to walk you through those on some slides here. There's a couple of slides that will show some text changes that were actually in the slides we showed yesterday, but they weren't in 5C, so we thought it appropriate to bring it forward. And then just at the end, there's a number of things that we want to, we're going to add or adjust in the basis for conclusion based on individual comments and feedback we've gotten from board members throughout the process. And we want to mention a couple of those because they're not in the current version that you saw. And of course, you'll get more chance to look at the basis conclusion. So I think there was a circulation of this last night for an agenda 5C turnaround, but we'll take you through the pages that have changed. So with that, Ken had a comment. We had thought about this very issue and just didn't change it, but we've now made that exception a separate paragraph, Ken, consistent with the proper consistency with the code's approach. And that required a couple of wording changes to make that first sentence make sense as a standalone paragraph then. This was a paragraph we did show you yesterday, so you've seen it. We've made no further changes to that. This was the change to 114.3. As we indicated, we were trying to address a comment that Caroline had actually helpfully brought to our attention, that we were not trying to create issues relative to internal training or quality enhancement initiatives. With regard to 206.82, this is a less change than what you saw yesterday. After some very helpful input from Brian and Laura, and working with us last night, we think we've gotten this back to where it needs to be, where this is how it's proper to describe a threat that needs to be dealt with. I think some of our wording we had yesterday made it seem like we'd already stepped beyond having a threat and had actually stepped into a breach area, and that wasn't our intent. So, and we believe this is consistent with 230.2 and how self-interest threats are defined. There was, Mark, you had suggested the heading change, and when we looked at this and the other headings, what we actually thought was easier was to make it clear that licensing of technology is within the concept of purchase of goods and services. So instead of the heading change, we added that phrase there. Again, this 600.6, we talked about this yesterday, so there's no change from that, where the key was that we're trying to focus only on those situations where there actually result is a provision of non-assurance service by the firm or network firm. And we think that as a signpost works, makes it clear and reduces some of the concerns raised by a couple different comments since the October session. As a result, there were reference changes throughout the document. Not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but we did make conforming changes and reference changes throughout the document consistent with the renumbering of the paragraphs in 114 itself. And the reference to extant paragraph 125A6 was changed to 125A9 in the glossary. Cam, you want to talk about the basis for conclusion items?
Thanks, Rich. So in the agenda materials, the task force, we've posted a draft basis for conclusions. So arising from the board discussion yesterday and also from the advanced comments, we'll add a couple more, expand on a few other areas. So as outlined on the slides. So in respect of paragraphs 200.6A2 and 300.6A2, those are the self-interest threats that that we were just discussing and that Rich just walked through just now. So it will be elaborated in the basis for conclusions how the self-interest threat is created in the context of Section 230, acting with sufficient expertise. And in relation to paragraph R114.2D, this additional rationale will be added as to the PA's duty for confidentiality in relation to market-sensitive information subsequent to its public announcement. And that's really just to explain a little bit more and add a little bit more color based on what the board discussed yesterday. And in relation to paragraph 520.6A1, that's the buying of goods and services. Caroline, in relation to your point, will expand on that. Purchase of goods and services also includes through digital platforms as well. And in response to an advanced comment on paragraph 78 in the draft basis for conclusions, that's with respect to indirect services provided by a firm to an audit client. So previously it was also raised, and it's outlined in the basis for conclusions, that it's there could be uncertainty whether or not in all instances a firm will know whether or not the end customer is an audit client. So the basis will be updated to include the fact that a firm can address this uncertainty by considering whether it's appropriate or not to establish policies and procedures that can monitor and identify such situations. So that's a couple of the areas arising from the board discussions that we will add to the draft basis for conclusion that we can circulate in again later on. So Rich, back to you.
Thank you. So with that, let's, and again, you will see another draft of the basis for conclusion, obviously. But with that, certainly open it up, Chair, to questions and comments from the board.
Thank you very much, Rich and Cam. Sonam.
Yeah, thank you. I have one comment at the top in connection to the requirement and to exception to it. In every requirement paragraph with an exception, the requirement paragraph starts with the phrase subject to paragraph X. So I believe this is the exception to the general drafting convention. We can add something at the beginning. Thank you.
This is I think what you're suggesting is that not an amendment to 114.3, but an amendment to 114.2 as the introductory words to that paragraph. That's certainly unobjectionable as far as Rich, I think we're concerned. That's just tying the two together. Ken, happy with that?
Yeah, just for the avoidance of doubt, R114.2 is going to read subject to paragraph R114.3. A PA shall not ABCD. Yeah,
that's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ken, for clarifying. Now I see a few people being happy with that explanation, so I think we are good with that. Sonam, do you still want to speak? No, thank you very much. So any other comments, any other questions, any other doubts? You again, Ken.
Yeah, just on R114.3, just a minor edit there. I'd suggest that we change the professional accountant to a professional accountant. That's just a minor edit. And then, and perhaps more a question for Ford. I think what I'm seeing here is 300.6, but I think there's a corresponding change in 200. And that's the discussion of the threats in relation to use of technology. I don't know if you have the wording on the screen.
200.
Yeah, no, I know that the task force is proposing changing the is to the might not, etc. And I was well. First of all, it seems to be introducing a slight degree of inconsistency with how we've introduced of a sort of examples of circumstances, fact circumstances in relation to different types of threats. If I were to look, for example, because I was indeed looking at the code in paragraph 300.6A1, the extent code uses more the gerund form of the verb. For example, in relation to self-interest threats, the bullets in that paragraph say a professional accountant having a direct financial interest, a professional accountant quoting, etc. And I guess the slight, as I said, the slight degree of inconsistencies is that when we introduce the suppositional form of the verb, might not, etc., it just raises question as to whether that is indeed a fact or a circumstance. And I saw the explanation that Assos did give.
Rich, this has been the subject of very extensive discussion last night, from Austria through to New York. So the concern that has arisen is that in the case of a professional accountant in business, the natural interpretation of 230.2, which is that the self-interest arises because you carry on with an instruction so that you retain the client or you get the fee, doesn't translate naturally to a situation where you are in the company because your sole self-interest is preserving your employment. And that can be something that you're facing, irrespective of whether you yourself are wrong, are thinking wrongly. And so as it was drafted, which had been through several iterations, the data available is not sufficient. As Rich described, took us into a situation where if you were doing that, you were in breach because you didn't have the information sufficient to enable you to perform properly. And you get then into an issue of, was that professional due competence, or is that intimidation? And what is it? So we were trying, by using might, to avoid a conclusionary situation, and which would allow the facts to be determinative of it. So for example, if I just translate this into self-interest for a second, so self-review for a second. In self-review, you may have that situation where you're looking again at the same work has been done elsewhere in the organization. But one of the ways in which you may avoid the self-review threat is by concluding, actually, we're not going to do any work in that area, or it's immaterial. So the fact of doing the work, having done the work, doesn't necessarily immediately mean you are in a self-interest threat position and therefore in breach. If you don't have the information or the data, or the technology is not competent, you are in the wrong place because it's already concluded as a final position that you are not complying with your professional obligations. That is why we ended up by going to a might. It's not I'm perfectly happy to accept, Ken, that it's not totally conventional with the rest, but it's a complex situation driven in part by the way in which Section 230 works and the circumstances we're dealing with, which is a professional accountant in business. And I hope that I've answered your question adequately.
Thank you, Richard. I know that was very helpful, and I'm comfortable with that position. And I'm just kind of looking around the board table here and just want to make sure that everyone has understood that explanation for that change. And if there's anyone who around the board who has any further questions or comments on the change.
Okay, thank you, Richard, and thank you, Ken, for raising the point, because it avoids leaving any doubt around the table. Thank you. So I don't see anyone wanting to provide any other comments, so I think the time to vote has come, right? This is an important moment at the end of a long and an important project. And before we vote, thank you again, irrespective of the result of the voting. Thank you again to all those who worked so much and so in such a dedicated and insightful way to allow us to be voting today on this project and these standards. And with this, I would ask the board who votes. Sorry, Ken.
There's a bit of a process to
okay,
it,
I'm sorry.
Gabriela. I know this is your first approval as board chair. So first of all, I'd like to confirm to the board that as indicated in my submission to the board as part of the agenda material, that the board has followed due process in terms of consultation, in terms of establishing the evidential basis for the project, etc., consulting with the CAG and so forth. That the board has followed due process up until the start of this meeting, and that during the course of this meeting, the board has also adhered to due process. And that's important for the record, that the board has complied with due process. Secondly, the board has seen in the agenda material a number of confirmations that the task force has provided to the board. And maybe for the record, again, I'll turn to Rich as chair of the task force to confirm to the board as to whether all significant issues that have been discussed in the task force have been aired in the board. Is that correct,
I
Rich?
confirm that, yes.
Thank you. Furthermore, that the task force believes there is no further need for consultation on any matter.
Yes, we completed our deliberations, and we don't believe there's any open items to discuss.
Okay, thank you for confirming that. And thirdly, and that's more a question for the board, is there any matter that stakeholders have raised as part of the exposure process that any board member has seen or is thinking about that the board, the particular board member believes ought to be discussed at this point? Whether it's a matter that's been previously aired or not, but if you have still any concern or any question, this is the moment to raise your matter. Okay, seeing none, then we can move into the voting process proper. And the voting really is a vote on two matters. Firstly, it's a vote to close the text as presented. It's not quite a final pronouncement yet, but it is a vote to close the board discussion. All issues have been closed and the board is comfortable with the final text. And the second vote is a vote on re-exposure. And once the board has voted on this matter, and if the board agrees there's no need for re-exposure, then we do have a final pronouncement subject to PIB approval. So let us move then to the first vote. And I will ask, first of all, if there is any board member who's abstaining from the vote. Okay, saying none. Is there any board member who is voting against?
Sorry?
Oh, Yaoshu, yes. Did you have a comment, Yaoshu? Or are you abstaining from the vote, Yaoshu?
Yes. I'm not against. Yeah.
But are you abstaining?
Yes.
Okay, you're abstaining. Okay, that's we have registered that. Anybody who's voting against the document? Nope. And before I ask for the affirmative votes, for the record, I will indicate to the board that Brian Friedrich is somewhere over the Atlantic. Whilst he is not able to vote in person, and we cannot register his vote because the board's terms of reference require votes to be in person or via telecommunications link, simultaneous telecommunications link. He has indicated that he's fully supportive of the text as presented. So that is for the record. But now for the affirmative votes, I would ask all board members who are voting for the final text as presented, if you could just raise your hand at this time. Thank you. We have 17 hands raised, and Yaoshu, I presume you're voting for the document. Are you approving the document?
Yes.
Okay, okay, so that's a confirmation that you're approving the document. Okay, because I thought you were abstaining from the vote. Okay, we have 17 votes for.
Wait, look at that.
I'm sorry. 18 votes for out of 18 board members. I think we have 100%, Ms. Chair, so it's a unanimous approval. That's fantastic, Brian. I don't know how you pulled that magic trick out of your hat, but it's unbelievable. So that's unanimous approval, and we do have the second phase of the voting, Gabriela, which we would like to take the board through. And before we take that second vote, I'll again ask Rich, as chair of the task force, to indicate the task force's recommendation as to whether there's a need or not for re-exposing the document as revised.
The task force has concluded that there's no need to re-expose.
And this second vote, then it's going to be a quick vote. Is there any board member who would believe at this point that there's a need to re-expose the document for any reason? Okay, then the board has approved a final standard. Congratulations. Maybe one final thing before we I'll hand the floor back to you, Gabriela. On the matter of effective date, Rich, if you could just confirm again what the board has agreed, just so everybody's clear.
Right. So as we explained yesterday, for the provisions in parts 1 through 3, they will be effective 15 December 2024. For parts 4A, it will be effective for audits for periods beginning on or after 15 December 2024. And for 4B, assurance engagement, the pronouncement will be effective for insurance engagements effective for periods 15 December 2024 or thereafter, or provisions similar to parts 1 through 3 are effective 15 December 2024.
Okay, thank you very much. Congratulations to the board, to the IESBA, to the task force, to all of us for this approval. Thank you, Ken, for guiding us through the voting process. It's indeed my first time, so happy to be acquainted with these procedures. I think it's an important moment that we should celebrate, but not yet, because we still have something to do. So thank you very much, and congratulations to all of us. And with this, we would move very quickly to the executive session, which is the last part of our meeting today. I'm sorry that we are going to take a bit of your lunchtime, but I think we should be ready soon.
I would suggest allowing 5 minutes, Gabriela, just so we can rearrange.
Okay.
And allow Brett to get settled in, and then the public observers. If
yeah, Brett is there. Brett is there already.
Oh, okay. Hi, Brett. But yes, just to make sure that there are no public observers around, so we can.
Yes, I think we are fine. Moving forward to the next item in the agenda, we have 4 topics and anything else that anyone may want to say on. But I would start with the last topic that is indicated in the cover notes, so that Brett James is released as soon as he wants. Brett James is the COO, is our COO, and he's been working very hardly in the transition to the new foundation that will host the IESBA and the IESB as of January 2023. But I will let Brett inform you about the status of this transition, and then we can take some time for some questions to Brett or to me on this transition. Brett, thank you very much for being with us. James Gunn had to leave; he had another commitment, but Brett will be more than able to update us, since he's the transition man. The one who has been kept very busy with his process. Brett, please.
Thanks, Gabriella. And we do have a couple of slides for you today, so I'll just speak briefly in the absence of them, and then we can get into the slides as we get through it. My purpose for coming here today is really to give you an opportunity to understand a little bit more about where we are with the foundation at the moment. We are in full transition mode. We are doing our very best to execute the monitoring group reforms in as efficient and effective a manner as possible. I guess the immediate thing I'd like to let you know is where are we in the process right now? And we are at the end of the beginning. The process that we've gone through at the moment has taken some years to get to this point, but we are at the point now where all the foundational documents have been set. We are in the process at the moment of having those voted on by the members and the trustees of the foundation. That will be completed shortly, and then we'll be able to commence operations. And our plan for that is very much 1st of January 2023, so we're only a couple of weeks away now. I'll just keep going, and hopefully the slides will turn up in just a moment. So there's 2 key things I want to express about this. One is, again, the point about we are at the end of the beginning, and the second point is that the reforms that we're looking at introducing will be introduced gradually over the next several years. We've got about a 3-year pathway towards full adoption, if you like. And we will take the opportunity as we go through this process to learn from experience. So as we're doing things, we can take a little pause if we need to. We can make sure that we've landed each phase of it successfully before we move on to the next one. If you have a look at the slide up there, you'll see some of the foundational or the real key milestones that we're looking at. But the thing I'd really like to draw your attention to is on the far right-hand side, which is completion of reforms somewhere in 2025 or beyond. So we have got a long pathway to get there. It is a very substantial package of reforms, and we want to make sure that we have enough time to do it properly. Next slide, please. So the second thing I want to let you know is what exactly is this foundation going to do? And the reason why I want to express this one is because there is, I think, sometimes some questions about how active is the foundation itself going to be independently of the 2 boards. And so I thought it would be helpful to share with you the purposes of the foundation according to its bylaws. And so you'll see that in the box at the top there. The key one is the first one, to establish and house the 2 boards. So establish and house. So the boards are established as soon as the foundation goes into effect. I know you're already here, but you take on a slightly different lens or viewpoint. But the role of the foundation is to operate those 2 boards. It's not to do very much on itself. And then there are 2 other purposes included there, which are really ancillary to that first one. It's recognize that important step that there is around public interest in all of these matters. We want to make sure that we've got the authorization for the foundation to operate in that space. And lastly, to conduct research and educational activities to support the standard setting process as and when they are needed. And just for the accounting and companies law geeks amongst us, the organization has been set up as a Delaware corporation. We are seeking 501c3 status for the American tax law gurus amongst us. That essentially is just a tax exemption route so that we don't have to pay tax on our income, which would be rather unfortunate given our budget. The foundation will be the employer of the SSB chairs and the SSB staff. Now you'll notice some little writing there that says as appropriate. We are trying to assemble a global staff team. That does mean that we will have people in different countries, and sometimes it doesn't make sense for us to operate a payroll in 13 different countries. We only have a very small but professional HR crew, and we do try to use their time judiciously. So sometimes we may have some indirect arrangements for those individuals, but there aren't that many of those concerned. Finally, I just wanted to mention how we're going to perform the rest of the functions of the organization, operating activities, IT, facilities, HR, communications. Those will continue to be provided by IFAC, the difference being that we will have the new service level agreement in place. So the service level agreement will stipulate obligations on IFAC, and we're paying them for their services. In fairness, they're giving us the money to pay them. So it is a little bit of a circular arrangement, but that is deliberate to make sure that there's accountability on both sides of the equation. Next slide, please. Okay, so third point I wanted to make was around who's involved in the foundation. And some of you will know this very well, and I apologize if you do, but if you don't, we thought it would be helpful just to pause on this for a moment. The founding members of the corporation, the foundation, the monitoring group, the Public Interest Oversight Board, and of course, the International Federation of Accountants. We conducted the inaugural meeting of the members in November. We did it actually by email, which turns out that that's permitted for a Delaware corporation. So we were able to do it in a very cost-effective and efficient fashion. The trustees of the foundation, 4 of them are nominated by the Public Interest Oversight Board and 2 are nominated by IFAC. The inaugural chair will be selected at the first trustees meeting, but it's expected that that will be Linda De Beer, the PIOB chair. In terms of officers, the bylaws allow us to have 4 officers, which are the 2 co-CEOs, being in their ex officio status as chairs of the SSBs, and also a secretary and a treasurer. Now, at the moment, we've selected, of course, Tom and Gabriella have taken on the co-CEO roles, or will as soon as we have the trustees meeting. And James is getting to wear another 2 hats, so he will be both secretary and treasurer for the foundation. We are having the first trustees meeting virtually on Saturday morning. It was unfortunately the only time we could find, so I'm very grateful for those involved and for making themselves available. It is a somewhat unpleasant time to have an inaugural board meeting. Okay, next slide, please. And I'm conscious I'm standing between you and lunch, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one. What you'll see in this document is, let me start again. With all these people involved, and we have a wide variety of existing arrangements with the PIOB, with the monitoring group, and of course, internal arrangements. We have service level agreements, we have funding agreements. With all of these documents and rules that are set up, we wanted to make sure that we had a clear and effective way to run the organization so that we didn't have, for example, duplicated oversight arrangements so that, multiple groups were looking at the same information. That would provoke inefficiency and it would provoke a lack of clarity on what everyone's role was. So we've assembled a responsibility matrix, and this essentially is just a summary of who's responsible for doing what in the foundation. And we've used this as an opportunity to try to clarify the roles as best we can. And so you'll see in this, for example, key agreements such as the funding framework agreement, the service level agreement, and our intellectual property agreement have to be approved by the Board of Trustees. So very clear and unambiguous as to what that role is. Equally, if you look at strategy and work programs, this is at the SSB level. So this is the audit strategy and work program and the ethics strategy and work program. Those are fundamentally, they're approved by the boards, but there is an oversight responsibility for the PIOB, which we've recognized. So this hopefully helps you understand a little bit how the groups will work together. You'll notice there's a few ticks in the Board of Trustees column, and there's a lot of ticks in the right-hand column, the column that relates to essentially the managerial responsibilities. And that's quite deliberate. Because we wanted to try to keep this at a low disruption model where we have the ability to keep running the organization essentially as it's been run so far. So most of the items that you'll see there, staff appointments, for example, will be dealt with by the co-CEOs. And of course, there'll be notes and disclosures and frequent reporting as needed back to the foundation board for whatever information they want to see. So that brings us to the end of my session today. I really hope this update gives you a greater sense of where we are at the moment in the process, the role of the foundation and how we will be operating it. We are on track for a 2023 launch. And I'll just turn to Gabriella now, just in case you had any additional comments you want to make, but otherwise I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Brett, for this very clear explanation and for your information about where we are in this process. We thought that this is important for this board to understand what's going on, what we are going to look like tomorrow, who is going to make decisions, take responsibilities, where the money comes from, what we are going to look like as a board, etc. So we have been talking very frequently about transition, about a new board structure and a composition and a approach and a new working model, etc. And this is what materializes finally all these recommendations of the monitoring group that we will put in place as of the 1st of January, hopefully, as Brett said, 2023, but to be implemented gradually and without disruption of the board's work, which is something that me and Tom have always had as a priority. Make sure that this happens as smoothly as possible, and making sure that there will be no disruption in the work, in the projects, and our capacity to deliver, which means that these changes will have to happen and be implemented hand in hand, not going too fast in one direction without making sure that we keep the capacity to do what we have to do. And with this, I would open here the floor for any questions that, as Brett said, he will be very happy to clarify. And I see Christelle.
I have two questions. First, is there a communication envisaged for this change to explain and promote or whatever in early 2023? And my second point, is there any, as the foundation has taken its name, is there any change envisaged in the two SSB's name?
Thanks for those questions. So first of all, in terms of communications, we are working on the communication plan for the foundation at the moment. We actually have a meeting this afternoon to lock down a few additional items. We will probably hold off on doing any sort of a formal press release until about the end of January. And that's partially because the Christmas holiday period is a bit of an awkward time to be doing anything. So I would expect to start seeing the first press release come out around about then. Having said that, I don't expect the foundation to be issuing a lot of press releases. We do want the focus to be very much on the IESBA and the IEESB activities. That's where the majority of the board's operations will be, and that's where I think quite appropriately the focus of the foundation should be as well. In terms of changes to the names, no. And in fact, they're baked into both the bylaws and the terms of reference for the board. So I don't foresee any changes to the names of the boards.
Thank you, Brett. Jens.
Thank you, Brett, for your presentation. It was very informative. I have just one further question concerning funding. Is there any possibility or trend to be visible that there's a diversification of potential future providers? Thank you.
As much as I wish I could say yes, unfortunately, we are in the same position we were in last time we spoke. Our funding is primarily coming via, well, all of our funding is coming via IFAC. The impetus, the increase that we're getting to launch the monitoring group reforms is fully being funded by the GPPC.
Thank you, Brett. But I would say that yeah, the answer is should be clearly yes. The question is where are the sources? But in the future, in the near future, we will have to, I think, start thinking about that more with a lot of focus on that. Galen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Brett, for a very informative presentation. So, you know, the resources of both of these boards are, you know, in many ways centered around staffing availability and the staffing resources. Are they always going to be viewed as distinct and separate, or will there be an interplay? You know, things are needed at IESB this month. Can we move people around, or are they going to be dedicated? Is some thought been given to that and how staffing is going to work between the two organizations? Is there flexibility, I guess, is my question.
Thanks for the question, Galen. I think the short answer is it's always flexible. We do have the capacity to move people between the boards as much as we need to. Having said that, well, let me just highlight that one Mr. Ken Seong was formerly a deputy director in the audit board, and he was moved over, you know, based on need. Now, obviously, that was a permanent shift, and perhaps you're thinking of something a little bit more flexible. The short answer, I think, is that with the addition of new staff, we will have capacities to look at new ways of organizing ourselves. So there will be some possibilities of doing it. I do want to emphasize, though, that the skill sets of an audit standard setter and the skill sets of an ethics standard setter are somewhat different. The drafting style between the boards is different, and the drafting, the learning curve on new staff to understand and appreciate the intricacies of the drafting and how to get things through each of the boards is a somewhat convoluted process. It takes me, on average, I'd say, about 18 months to 24 months to bring on a new staff member. It's a very long time, but it's a very, that's to the point where they start feeling very confident and capable of moving on. So for those people that are moving between boards, I'd just be a little bit worried about their capacity to assist immediately. But having said that, of course, we're always flexible and able to do so if the right circumstance arise. Ken, of course, you know, happy to have you jump in as well.
What I was going to say, Brett, you know, as the need arises, you know, I would say it's going to be baptism by fire. I mean, we'll throw in the staff at the deep end and let them swim or sink, as the saying goes, which I had myself had to face. But I must say, I mean, I maybe take a slightly different take on really adapting to a different sort of environment in terms of setting standards. I would say, yes, the standards are different because they're addressing different subject matters, different services, etc. But you know, once you're in that you know, once you're swimming in the lake of you know, setting auditing and related standards, you won't be on a completely different planet. You know, there are so many different commonality, or so I was going to say something that's you know, inconsistent, but there are so many commonalities between the two boards in terms of, you know, the stakeholders, you know, the nature of the services, the engagements, the assurance, etc., that it would be completely an ice bucket sort of shower to send somebody out, you know, from audit into ethics and vice versa. You know, so they would be able to hit the ground with a fair amount of speed, I would say. But yes, there will be a short period of adaptation that will have to be factored in, and they should be able to operate with a fair degree of independence, at least to some extent initially. The other thing I was going to say is that we are contemplating within this model some shared services. I think, and maybe Brett, you might be able to share a bit of this in terms of the shared sort of research, sort of focused staffing resources, and what we are sort of contemplating in that area.
Sure, happy to do so. I think there's an opportunity as we expand the size of the staff complement to look at different ways of operating ourselves. So the wording in the monitoring group reforms was an expanded and enhanced staff complement. So one of the things we can look at is different models of how the staff work together. And so I think at a future meeting is probably a good time for us just to explore some of our thinking around, what we might be able to do that is sort of common to both boards. And just to give you an idea of what might be an easy one, the two consultative advisory groups were merged into one. At the moment, we have two separate staff teams who support the two separate CAGs. We're not going to need that in the future. I'm sure we're going to be able to find a way to get some efficiencies out of that process. So there's a good example of something that probably belongs in some sort of a central function.
Thank you, Brett. Mark.
Yeah, thank you. I just really want to say, Brett, that it's really hard not to overstate the importance of what is happening now. This is a significant change, and this is the delivery of a new operating model. And as I sort of watch your presentation, I look back to the first document I wrote on this issue on the 2nd of February 2017, which sketched out a model that would house the boards. And I think to recognise how far it has come and what it will deliver is, it's pretty much, as I look at the long list that I've got, it delivers on pretty much all of those aspects. So, this is a major step forward in terms of addressing the public interest concerns that the monitoring group was looking to address. So this is fantastic work, and it's great to see.
Thank you very much, Mark. Gail, no, okay. I don't see any more questions. Let me just add to what has been explained, that, and I have mentioned that before, we will also gradually develop, or we are already doing that, a new model coming from a board-based model into a staff-based model. Of course, this is one of the biggest challenges, because for that to happen, we have to have the right capacity and right resources in place. It's not only a matter of resources, it's also a matter of gradual education of both the board and the staff. But I think that, of course, the rules and the procedures help us meeting the objectives. But looking around and thinking about what happened over this last year, we are already putting some initiatives in place and slightly changing the approach, both of the board and of the staff. That it's already the start of this new working model. So, and this shared services that Ken mentioned, and Brett as well, is also part of it. It's making sure that there is more flexibility or more synergies between the two boards in terms of the use of resources. Brett, anything else?
No, thank you for the opportunity to talk today. And of course, we're an open book here. So if anyone wants to grab me on any of the breaks or reach out to me separately, always happy to talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brett. Thank you for your patience to wait, and thank you for your very clear, for the very informative presentation. Yeah. And with this, can we move to the next topics in the executive agenda? So, well, we have here a few topics, but I'll try to be very quick. One of them is the approval of the minutes of the executive sessions of September 14 in Nashville. They have been circulated, and so if you have any comments, please provide them. Or yeah, I don't know if there is anything that you'd like to say about that.
Gabriela was going to suggest to invite any comments now, and if no comments, we can ask for approval.
Yeah. I don't see any comments, so we consider the minutes of the September board meeting, the executive session in September, approved. The other topic is the report back on the outreach activities. And here I have an existential doubt because we can stay here 1 hour or 2 or not say anything about that. It is what it is. It seems a shopping list. It's not a shopping list. It has taken and is taking as a lot of effort, commitment, dedication, time, energy, etc. It is a very long list of activities. I have counted them, but I will not speak about the numbers because it's not the most relevant. The most relevant is what we take, the takeaways of these meetings and what we are creating and the seeds that we are launching around the world and with our stakeholders. That I think it's extremely important. Some of these meetings, they may seem that they are not as worth as others because we don't see the immediate feedback and result, but I'm very much sure that this will flourish in the near future or in the midterm future, as in terms of recognition, in terms of understanding, in terms of support, in terms of creating a different culture, etc. So we don't see the results immediately. Some of them, yes, because we bring back a lot of information, because we explain a lot of things to our stakeholders. Some others, it's about creating a long-standing relationship and meaningful relationship with stakeholders, which will give fruits in the future. So let's think big and let's do the same that we ask to our stakeholders, which is to think, have a long-term vision and not a short-term vision. Any question about this outreach? I'd like to say more because some of them were really rich and important, but trying to pick up among these activities is indeed very difficult. So if you have any question or any comment about any of these outreach activities, please let me know. What I can tell you is that I will keep on being as committed as I am. Of course, and tomorrow I'll say probably more about that, but 1 year after, I think that I have more clear where, considering the work plan and strategy that we are setting up, it is more clear to me where I and we should focus next year. So next year it will probably be a little bit more structured, but it is still time, I think, to take this big opportunity for IESBA and to get to reach out to our stakeholders and make people understand what ethics means, what's the importance of ethics for the accountancy profession, the difference that we can make. It's about that. It's not about becoming famous or etc. It's about making a difference and making impact. So I foresee another very intensive year in terms of outreach. Of course, we will more and more rely upon our board members, technical advisors, staff, as well as outreach ambassadors around the world as we go and as we have a more aligned vision about what we want to do. This is so important that there is the other side of the coin, which is we have to be very careful about what we tell to our stakeholders about the messages we pass. And there is something about which I'm particularly concerned, which is consistency. The board must have one voice. We may have all the discussions internally, everything that we can, all the disagreements, but once we go out, we have to be very careful with the message that we pass, because it has to be the same message, a consistent message, a coherent message to the outside. And this takes us, I would say, some work in the future on the communication side to make sure that there is some, I would say a policy, but some mechanisms or some ways of making sure that we are seen as a board externally. And I would say anything more about that because we don't have time. Any question, of course, I will be very happy to respond. Ken has been involved in most of these outreach activities with me, so he can also respond now or ongoing in case you have any question or comment.
I don't know if Laurie, you wanted to come in at this point.
I was just going to make a very brief comment and say I think this amount of outreach is really good. I just think for everybody at the board notices the Herculean effort that went on this year in terms of getting out there. And I think it's both, it's great both in terms of the message given to all of those outreach opportunities. And I know there was a lot of travel involved, and that's a personal drain, but I think a good investment, but also what you're hearing back, which influences things, which is, so it's that two-way communication from stakeholders that I think is so important. So really well done.
Very well said, Laurie, because it's exactly the point. We give, but we take back, and sometimes what we take back is more important than we give. And there are impacts of the two sides of the communications. So if there aren't any other comments or suggestions in this respect, I think that the other topic is the PIOB report. You have seen it, it has been circulated. The PIOB report had some specific comments on some specific projects. And looking at very synthetically at what the PIOB has conveyed to us, I think that we are covering all the PIOB concerns. And I mentioned, for instance, on technology, the recommendation of the PIOB that the working group report recommendations and conclusions would be taken on board, or at least considered in the future activities of the board, which we have done yesterday on ETGA, that any independent exceptions to the independence requirements for non-network component auditors of group auditors should be limited and based on evidence. And we saw on our first day how much evidence and work has been done to respond to this request, of course, to the request of others, but to the PIOB's request, which I think was well succeeded in terms of bringing, giving the PIOB what had been asked. On tax planning, the guidance to set up high expectations on PA's behavior and produce substantive change. And I think that the exposure draft that we have approved, that we will approve next week, it goes in that direction. And on sustainability, the strong support from the PIOB for professional agnostic standards and their expectations to see how are we going to make this concrete. So I think that we are meeting and responding to the PIOB's concerns and requests, and that we are here also in a comfortable situation. And with this, I don't know if I forgot about. There is one thing that is not in the agenda, but I wanted to mention at this point in time. You, as the board members know, there is an evaluation process of the board members. It has changed because everything has changed, this transition process. We have now a nominations committee that has been put in place this year to nominate the next year, the future board members. You know already that we will have 2 new board members that have been selected by the nominations committee. The nominations committee has also reappointed Rich and Laurie and approved Laurie as vice chair. So there is a totally new independent process in place, taken care by the nominations committee, the new nominations committee of the PIOB and the PIOB itself. And this evaluation process will also change this year because it's a responsibility of the nominations committee and of the PIOB, of course, run by the chairs of the boards on the basis of a document that sets up the criteria and the process, or more the criteria than the process, for the evaluation of the members. So James Gunn will kindly circulate to you on tomorrow or early next week this document. It's not very different from what we had in the past. It has a different name. The criteria have been revisited and a little bit worked upon, but you will get that document, and you will know that from now on the evaluation process will start. I will communicate with you to let you know a little bit more about it, but I'll probably set up individual calls or something like that. But yeah, until the end of the first quarter of 2023, I must communicate the result of this evaluation to the nominations committee and the PIOB. So the process will start by tomorrow, I'd say, and will run throughout the first quarter of 2023. This evaluation it is what it is. I think it's an important moment for the board members and for everybody. They don't have an immediate direct impact on anything. Of course, the PIOB nominations committee considers this evaluation when it comes to reappoint people or take very unusual decisions on the continuity of the term or whatever. But I think it's an important moment, and we should look at it as constructively as possible, not as to allow board members to improve as necessary their performance in one area or the other or whatever. So that's it. On my own evaluation, I don't have much information to provide because things will change as well, but it hasn't been completely finalized as a process until now. But as soon as I have more information, of course, I will circulate it. Me or the PIOB or James Gunn or whoever. It's the responsibility of the PIOB, not of the nominations committee, as far as I can understand it now. But but we'll know about it as well. And I think that with this, we are finally reaching the end of this meeting half an hour later than, or 25 minutes later than we had it was necessary to include all this and to give time to the board members to discuss the strategy and work plan, which was actually and really the substantive topic for discussion today. I wish you all a very good free afternoon because for some of you, those who don't have any meetings can.
Just a few announcements. Thank you so much, Gabriela. And yes, it's been a very long and productive morning, I would say, and congratulations again to the technology task force for getting us over the line. First of all, the agenda for tomorrow, we have ETGA for consideration, a revised draft. It's not for approval yet, but it's for any reactions from the board to the changes that the task force has been working very hard on during the early part of the week. And secondly, the sustainability project plan comprising the 2 project proposals, and these are going to be presented by Mark and his working group. And again, they've also been very diligent there. Hopefully, the board will be in a position to approve those a little bit earlier than scheduled. So tomorrow, if the board is able to and in position to take a vote on those, and those just for the board's information. The approval of the project proposals can be done by simple majority. I'm very hopeful we'll get a unanimous approval, but it's simple majority compared with a 2/3 for standards and exposure drafts. And finally, the board social activity. I'm hoping everybody has the directions for the dining spot for this evening. But if not, feel free to contact any member of staff and ask you. He's on standby. Thank you.
Ken, if I may, 30 seconds tomorrow, the agenda says we will be ready by 12, but I suspect that it won't be like that because we still have some, I'd like to say some words on what was this year, but we also have Caroline and Hero leaving, etc. So expect a little bit of a delay with respect to the end of the meeting tomorrow. I was going to suggest that we start earlier, but I think it's not necessary. Okay, so see you later this evening. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Yep, indeed, the ETJ papers have been circulated. You might have seen the email coming through. So yeah, you have the documents now.